I have pretty good questions with this time, but I'll look at it one more time. Oh, really?
Everybody, we're going to go ahead and get started in just 1 minute, so if you'll sew up your conversation.
I mean, it was time for gentler heart. All right. Multiple yeah, I know. So you really like that. I ran faster. Making my track. I think my neighbor right here. All right. Hi, Daniel. Okay. Yeah.
Sorry that we had something.
Oh, listen, you were a champion. The technology after the story was, it's so hard to be remote.
No worries. We've got one today, so hopefully.
Okay. We were on the phone a while ago. Listen, I have big, you don't know the breed, not German Shepherd, lab. I ran short on yeah, so I don't think we're going to further into my happy to be here. Happy to be here. Yeah, now I was thinking, I think maybe this is going to help us because there was actually something else on the street. Yeah. And I'm thinking, well, she doesn't scare me, she's not scary, but Hi. I'm Lydia. Hi, Lydia. Yes. I heard your voice. Hi, Stacy. Morning. Hi. Hi, Jess. I made it here to the right place. Yeah. Telling Dana there was a loose dog in my neighborhood this morning. It's pretty scary. Like a mean dog. Oh. Yeah. Yeah, there's ambulances there right now because he bit another 2 people. Yeah. Oh, crazy start to my day. Okay, great.
All right, everybody. We're 5 minutes after our appointed start time, and that in America is courtesy. So we'll go ahead and get started. My name is Greg Belomo. I'm from Government Performance Solutions, and I'm facilitating today. I'm going to turn it over to Lydia Woligarski, who's going to welcome you all and call the meeting to order.
Sure. Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's family meeting. My name is Lydia Woligarski, and I'm from Bourbon City, Colorado, and we are going to go through our agenda today. I believe there are copies of the agenda out on the table. We'll also be displaying things on the screen. I don't believe we have handheld microphones, but we do have some people that are calling in to the call, and so if you have comments, please state your name to conference participants here at the table as well before you speak, so the people on the phone know who's speaking. But welcome, and we're all set for a very productive meeting. We certainly want to welcome Dr. Applebaum, who's here with us today from DC, and we're going to get to learn from her knowledge, expertise, and experience, and please make sure you ask her any questions you may have.
Okay. One more thing, just for the benefit of everybody on the phone. Task force members, if you can please speak up. If we speak for the people in the audience here, then that volume should translate pretty well to the folks on the phone. And all of you in the back, we've got better AV support than we did last time. If, however, you're unable to hear, or Trish Campbell, I know you're on the phone, if you're experiencing an issue, please just message in or text Daniel, and we'll make some adjustments here to make sure that everybody is able to hear and follow the action. Okay? Stacy, if you would.
So my name is Stacy Campbell. I'm with Campbell Litigation, and also have an opportunity to work with the Colorado Chamber of Commerce. I'm going to talk just a little bit about kind of who we are and why we exist. So last spring, Senate Bill 19188 was passed in both houses, and it was to allow a study of a family medical leave concept. And the 13 of us and all the others that are working here are looking for or creating or developing a recommendation that will be for the implementation of a paid family medical leave program in Colorado. So that's kind of who we are and what we're doing. We've got a lot of work to do in a very short time period.
I apologize. I was looking at Stacy Campbell when I said Trish Sullivan. When I said Trish's name, it's Trish Sullivan on the phone from Steamboat Ski and Resorts. All right, Daniel, next page, please.
Yes.
So this is our second task force meeting. Here's what we're trying to do today. First, we want to align the task force members on lessons learned from other states. Dr. Applebaum is here to help us with that. Second, we're going to give the task force members an update on the various contracting activities, the studies that are underway. As you all will remember from the last meeting, there are many different paths converging to inform the recommendations that this task force will make. And then third, we're going to prioritize the topics for our September discussion and onward. The bill requires that the task force make recommendations in 16 specific areas. And so we're going to do a quick exercise to understand which topics should we talk about together and what's the relative priority, which ones should come first. So those are the three things that we're trying to do today. Daniel, if you would. This agenda page is basically what you all received as you walked in. Just point out a couple of things. We're going to have a discussion with Dr. Applebaum in two parts. She's going to share some lessons learned and respond to some questions that we had given her in advance. We'll take a short break where we'll transition to a working lunch. For those of you in the audience, if you'd like to run out and grab some lunch, you're certainly welcome to do so and bring that back. And then after about 15 minutes, we'll transition to a Q&A with Dr. Applebaum for another 45 minutes or so. So task force members, get your questions ready. Then we'll do that exercise I mentioned where we group items that we should talk about together and then prioritize them so that our future agendas talk about things in the order that you think is most appropriate. All right? Last thing I'll say, public comment, we're allowing 20 minutes at the end. If you would like to address the task force during the public comment period, just come and see me during one of the breaks. I'll take your name down and we'll just go in order. We'll allow about 2 minutes per and appreciate your efficiency. All right, next page. All right, so let's do the process update and a quick recap of our group guidelines. Jeff Fitzgerald, if you would, help us with all of the things that we have been doing and where we are on those.
Sure, thanks, Greg. Again, Jeff Fitzgerald, Unemployment Insurance Division Director, and helping as a project manager on this effort. Short update, just to notify the task force members and the public that last meeting we talked about the inputs that need to go into this process to help to deliberate on the 16 variables that Greg referenced. And working from top to bottom, just want to comment on what's being completed versus what's in progress. Essentially, the long and short of it is that everything is on timeline, and we are maneuvering through all of those deliverables. So the first two items, the request for information that was delivered to the task force, the contract with the experts that's been executed. So we've got 3 experts that are providing the necessary reports on the variables discussed. Recommendations from 3 experts in the field. The contract has been executed. They're in the process of delivering those reports. The anticipated deadline for that is September 9th. Request and receive public comments. That process started this Sunday and will run for 30 days as prescribed in the legislation. And there are numerous ways to access that, and I'll turn it over to Admira to talk about the various ways to do that, okay? We've got a third-party administration analysis that's being conducted by the department. That is also in progress. The anticipated deadline on that is September 25th. Department of Public Health is producing a report related to the health benefits. That is in process and on deadline and on target for a deadline of no later than October 1st. And all of those inputs go into the first recommendation from this task force group, which again, the deadline for that is November 1st. That will then turn into a product that goes to an actuary to be in terms of its solvency and what the financial implications of that recommendation might be. We are in the solicitation process for that actuary, and that will be, responses are due to the department by August 30th, so the end of this week. And then finally, as noted in the last meeting, the final reports will be due by this task force on January 8th. Any questions for me from the task force? Since it just opened and since there's a great deal of public in the room, Admira, do you want to go over the various ways that the public can provide public comment?
Thank you. My name is Admira Marcus, and I'm currently a senior hearing officer with the UI division, working with Jeff and also helping out on this project as a research analyst. There are 3 different ways that the public can currently submit comments to this particular task force. The instructions are located through the task force website and the Colorado Register, but just in short, you can submit the comments by mail. There's a mailing address listed on the notice. You can also submit them directly to me by email. My email is also listed on the Colorado Register and on the public notice that was published on yesterday, actually, by our team. And then you can also submit them using a form that's embedded on the Colorado Task Force website.
Okay.
Got you, Chris? All right, so quick recap. Everything's on pace, but there's a lot of everything. And what you can see from these is the task force is going to benefit from many different streams of information. Appreciate in advance those of you who are able to share public comment. That's always helpful. Okay, a couple quick refreshers. Everyone, please have a little bit of patience with our technology and with the AV, but that doesn't mean be silent. If there's an issue, if, for instance, you can't hear somebody, or Trish, if we inadvertently hit the mute button and go quiet on you, please let us know. Also, state your name each time you speak. That helps for the recording, but it also helps for everybody in the back and everybody on the phone to know who's speaking. Be brief and stay on topic. We've got a lot to do. And one of my jobs is to make sure that we stick to the agenda that we have created, and I need your help with that. Those of you in the room, thanks in advance. Please check and make sure your device is silenced. And if you can keep crosstalk to a minimum, that helps, again, the people on the phone not be disturbed by the background noise. Those of you on the phone, Trish, if you can signal Daniel for your desire to participate or just interject. I know that that can sometimes be hard because the microphones don't always pick up multiple inputs at the same time. So thanks for your patience on that. And also, if you're on the phone, please use mute when you're not speaking. Okay? All righty. So, last time we talked a little bit about some of the procedures for getting to recommendations. And what Jeff just shared is on November 1st, there's an initial framework of recommendations that then will be evaluated by an actuary. That'll inform a set of final recommendations that are due on January 8th of next year. So we talked a little bit about how we'd like to conduct business. And I've worked with Lydia and Stacy, and we've got a proposal for you. So I'll go ahead and deliver that. Lydia and Stacy, back me up if I miss anything. So our goal is to prepare specific recommendations for a bill that's acceptable to as many parties as possible. Okay? Here's how we propose to do that. We'll adopt a simplified parliamentary procedure. So not all of the specifics of Robert's Rules of Order, but basic Parley Pro to ensure some efficiency of the discussion. So we'll talk about given topics. I'll direct that conversation, and I'll use polling to help understand where you all are parked. And I'll just say, hey, who's for, who's against, who needs more information? Okay. As the discussion matures, specific recommendations or proposals will likely emerge. We would encourage you at that point to actually offer a motion. I move that the task force. Okay. Any task force member may second it, and after seconding, we'll go through initial discussion as needed to gear us toward a specific vote. The chair, Lydia, or in her absence, Vice Chair Stacy, will direct that initial vote. Okay? If 8 or more votes are received, we propose that we just move on, recognizing that there are certain things in which strong opinions will remain, but we have a lot to do. So our proposal is, if we get 8 votes, we'll move the discussion forward. If you continue to feel strongly about that, we'll provide an opportunity to record a minority opinion. Okay? Stacy and Lydia, how did I do in terms of recapping what you and I, or what we discussed? Good?
I think it's very accurate, and just knowing that we have a lot of work to do, and there's certainly a lot of room for discussion on things, but a lot of that discussion, a lot of that work is sometimes going to have to take place outside of this group as well. This group is really one that comes together to move forward the bill in terms of why we're here, in terms of we are creating a process. Oh, thank you. Sorry. And so, yes, thank you. We're all here to move a recommendation together and to move that forward. And so there's going to be a lot of work that's going to have to take place in between task force sessions as well. And so this is what we came up with to make sure that we were able to move forward in the time that we had allotted to us. And so if there's any discussion on that, we'd love to hear it. But I think that's what we came up with after last meeting.
Any feedback from the task force?
I think that it makes sense, and if you're passionate about not agreeing with the direction, then you have the ability to document why. I think that makes sense.
Okay. Kathy?
Did we, so the 8 votes will be for everything rather than just a simple majority?
Yeah. Kathy, speaking of, we've spoken before about a simple majority being adequate just for administrative details. So that's not reflected here. What do you all think about that? Stick with the 7 for the most basic of administrative things, but go with 8 on anything that's substantial and directly related to the recommendations that you're trying to produce? Edwin?
Yeah, this is Edwin Zoto Mama. And based upon what I'm reading here, we are going to have a simple majority, but for the sake of efficiency, if we have 8 votes, then we're just going to move on unless someone strongly objects to that vote, for which then that minority opinion will be recorded. But that does not change the fact that it's going to be a 7th vote for all decisions. Is that correct?
Stacy and Lydia, how does that meet with your intention?
I think the thought was, in our recommendation,
And a little louder.
So this is Stacy Campbell. I think the thought was, and Lydia, correct me if I'm wrong, that it would be an 8-person vote. If 8 people voted, then we're moving on, noting the minority opinion. So, and then, I mean, we could decide on, the minor things that it's just going to be a simple majority. I mean, we could do that as well.
Kevin, what happens if we don't get 8? Is there a plan if we stall? We have a goal we have to meet. We don't get 8. We don't get 8 on the first issue. We don't get 8 on the second issue. What's the plan there? Revisit 8?
I don't think we want to revisit, sorry, this is Lydia. I don't think the intention is to revisit 8. I think the intention is to, for us to recognize that there are some things that we're going to have to move forward with because we only have a certain amount of meeting time together. So we're going to do our best to move through with consensus.
This is Stacy Campbell. I would add, I think, along that line, as we're discussing, I mean, I hope, or our hope would be that we're going to be giving and taking. And so, the vote may be, on this particular issue, and maybe it falls short of 8, but then we're able to say, okay, well, what if I give this, or what if I give that? And the hope would be that through that process, we'd get to 8, and then we could move on and note the minority.
Jared?
Yeah, so I think, that as a goal and overall makes a lot of sense and is what we should strive for. But I think, as this legislation sets out, we are charged with giving recommendations on those, I think it was 16 variables to an actuary to do an actuarial analysis. And if we're not going to be able to have something to provide to the actuary on each of those, it won't be a successful outcome as the legislation set out. So I do believe if we aren't able to reach 8 with documentation of a minority opinion, if there's a strong feeling, we need to be able to move forward with a simple majority that still somehow documents so that an actuary is able to do an analysis of a program and the cost, because if we're missing some of those 16 factors, they won't be able to do any sort of accurate analysis. So, I'm comfortable with this, but I think we need to have a plan for how to provide on those 16 factors something to an actuary to be able to do the analysis that is the purpose, in my opinion, of this legislation.
And Jared, I think I agree with you, this is Joe Morello, but I think if you don't get to 8 on any of those, you go back to the table and come up with a new option where you vote on that and you try to get 8. So I don't think we want to submit blank opinions or suggestions for those 16 variables, but we have to get to a point, okay, we didn't get 8, what's the next best thing that we can bring to the table and get 8 votes on? So in no way I don't want to think that we're going to give up on it and give it blank. I think we need to get to a recommendation on all 16 where we have 8 votes.
My question is around I remember in the last task force, we had a conversation about how we were going to decide if it's a simple majority or 8. And so I'm just wondering where this proposal came from around 8. I still believe that a simple majority is the way to go. And so I'm just wondering where that proposal came from and how that.
Sure. So, Leah, I just know, looking at what the time that we have to do, we've got to have a way so that we can move on. We've got to have a way that we can come to some sort of consensus. We're not going to, it's no one's intention to not get to all 16 of these, and looking at the amount of work we have, we wanted to make sure that we had a path that we could move when we needed to move. Now, maybe it's that it doesn't become, we don't need to get to the 8. Maybe we find some consensus and we go through as we need to get through them. But we've got a lot of work with a short amount of time, and so we needed to have some sort of way that we could say we need to pause on this and get to this because we have an hour remaining or time we have to get to 16.
Yeah, in terms of my concern is that I get the 8 vote majority. That part I think everybody's fine with. But my concern is that when push comes to shove, we need to have these rules, ground rules, established now, as opposed to trying to figure out later, because later on it's going to be contentious already. I don't think it's going to be any better if we're going to try to make up rules ad hoc down the road.
Right.
Yeah.
I would strongly recommend that we establish what that rule is. Is it 7-6, or is it going to be 8-5, or whatever that number is?
I understand what, Kevin Duncan, I understand what Joe's saying in the spirit of trying to get 8. That sounds good idea. But as far as Edward is concerned, if something doesn't pass after 3 votes and 8, it goes to simple majority, is what we have to do. Just so we have a way of moving forward. And that way, if there's going to be compromise, you've got to make a compromise on 3 votes. After that, it goes to majority. Give a little incentive for people to move forward. If we leave it at 8, and we don't have ground rules, we can stop halfway through or on the first step. So I don't know if we need to make that a motion or if that's something we need to consider.
We try.
Can I raise a question? This is Hadley Manning. I like that proposal. Do we need a contingency for if we cannot reach 7? This question.
Yeah.
So I think the issue with saying try 3 votes and then change the decision rule is that actually works against finding compromise, because if there's a group of 7 that have a position, then what that tells that group of 7 is hold out and then your part will pass. So I don't advocate for the change the decision rule after 3. I also agree that we definitely need to agree on the rules up front and not change them ex post. I personally like this proposal a lot. The reason I like it is because we have a bunch of different stakeholders represented in the room, and by having the 8 rule, I think you're going to end up with a better product, because you're going to have more of the stakeholders represented in the final decision, and the process is, going to have to require considering a larger group of stakeholders and making the recommendations. But I fully agree we need to either choose the 8 or choose the 7 and stick with it going forward. I will also say that in this thing of 16, the truth is, and that's part of the exercise later, it's not required that we need recommendations on all 16 to get a good actuarial report. So I don't think we should be overly daunted. It's still daunting. It's very daunting, but shouldn't be freaking out about the 16.
Does anyone want to make a motion?
Tara? I move we implement the recommendations that were provided. Is there a second?
I second.
Okay, ready for a vote? Okay,
Point of order, we should have a discussion after the second motion.
oh, yes, thank you. Thank you.
Sorry.
Hadley, go ahead.
Edwin, so to Tara's point, I completely understand and agree that it's important to have stakeholders. But at some point, the example that Tara mentioned about having the 7 people recognizing that they have that power, the converse is true as well as for 5 people who realizes that if they hold out, that they can stop the process just as much as the 7 people on the other side. So I want us to be very mindful of that going forward, thinking that the 8 may be a good solution to the stakeholders.
Hadley, then Jared.
Right. I'm unclear on if we vote on the motion, how many votes we need to pass the motion. Sorry. I just wanted to ask. Do we need 7 or 8 votes to pass the motion?
So the only thing, just again as a point of order, last time for administrative items, not related to the recommendations themselves, the task force agreed on a simple majority.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Jared?
Yeah, I agree with Edwin's point. I think that is a really good one about what incentives it gives for, 5 folks who may feel very strongly in the ability to, 5 or 6, to be able to, force some changes that maybe don't reflect the majority. And I think, there are definitely items in the 16 that may not be essential to the actuarial analysis, but from, some experience working on this, the pieces of it that are the most contentious are the ones that go most directly to the actuarial pieces that are pretty critical to this analysis. So I still, have deep concerns that we might not be able to reach 8 on some of these items, and that there be a clear process for what to do in that case.
Judith, then Kevin?
No, also just with what Tara was sharing in regards to, moving the process forward. I just believe that, a simple majority, we see it at the state legislature. It's a very common voting method. And I think that, to move the process forward, I would actually advocate for just a simple majority to push our work forward. And as Tara was saying, to not go back and change it, we can have an agreement. That's what I would recommend.
Kevin Duncan, yeah, that's my question also, is how does the legislature do this? Simple majority, we should mirror what the legislature does on this. And, I think my suggestion earlier was trying to work around this 8 thing so we can move forward. But I would say we should just mirror what the legislature would do in this situation. My other question is, what if we stayed with 8, what happens if we are stuck? Can we still proceed and say, we're gonna move forward and this was approved by 7 out of 13? I mean, what do? We agree, now we're not gonna change this, it'll be written in stone, it's 8. How do we move forward if we don't get it? That's the issue. So I say we go with majority on all matters.
Any other discussion?
We call the question.
Okay.
So we've got a motion on the floor. It's Tara's motion.
A little louder, Stacy.
So we have a motion on the floor. It's Tara's motion, and I call the question. We're ready to vote.
Okay. So the vote is, should we move forward at 8? And I just, real quick, I just want to, sorry, one point of discussion to Dr. Duncan's question. So I think at that point we just document, this was the discussion, here's where we're at, here's where this is, and so we've got that documented. And then, you know, at the end of the day, we're not the ultimate decision makers, that's our legislators and other folks. And so we can say, we talked about this, here's what we talked about, here's where we landed as part of our discussion, and people will have to make that decision a little bit later on. So it is punting it a little bit, but we do get the discussion on the table, we do document both of those things. Okay, so right now we have a call to question, and so the question for voting is, should we move forward substantial pieces with a vote of 8 people? I could have said that a little bit better, but, okay.
How many votes do we need to pass this?
7.
7?
Okay. Everyone in favor?
1, 2,
Aye.
3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Aye. Trish on the phone.
Okay.
Aye.
Thanks, Trish.
So that carries. That passes.
Okay.
Okay.
Very well. Okay. So we are very lucky to have Dr. Eileen Applebaum with us today. I'll ask her to introduce herself. She's agreed to share some lessons learned. This is an area of expertise, something she studied for a long, long time, and so she's going to share a bit. Then we'll take a quick break to transition to a working lunch, and then we'll have open Q&A. But I'll ask Dr. Applebaum if there are, during your discussion, during your remarks, if people have clarifying questions. Would it be okay if they ask?
That would be fine.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
So I'm Eileen Applebaum, and I've been a professor of economics at Temple University in Philadelphia. I've been a distinguished professor in the School of Labor and the School of Management and Labor Relations at Rutgers University. And at Rutgers, I also directed the Center for Women in Work during the period in which we got paid family, or what we call family and medical leave insurance in the state of New Jersey. So I'm very familiar with all of the arguments, conversations, the research that I've done with Ruth Milkman, and we've looked at both paid family and medical leave, but also paid sick days. We do surveys, especially surveys of employers. At this point, they won't even give us money to survey the employees. The foundations say, we know they like it, you know, how are the employers dealing with it? And we always include going out and talking to employers. So we will talk with 25 or 30 employers after the fact. In New Jersey, in advance of anything happening, Ruth and I went out and talked to 30 or so employers. What are your concerns? What's happening? Governor Corzine, who was the governor at the time, wanted us to speak with all of the business organizations in the state. We were very happy to do it. Since we could call and say the governor has asked us to speak with you, the chamber did hold meetings with us. Otherwise, they may or may not have. I wouldn't know, but we did call and say the governor asked. So we had these. We met with the South Jersey Chamber of Commerce, with the Women's Auxiliary. I don't know what to call them. Women Entrepreneurs Group. We met with small business people. But the main thing we did is to go around the state and talk to actual businesses. How are you handling things now? What do you think the problems might be? And of course, anytime you introduce something new, there's going to be anxiety. Nobody knows how things are going to work until they've had some experience with it. And I can tell you this about business people. They are extremely busy. The last thing they have time to do is read up on what is the latest version of any piece of legislation that's coming down the pike. They have no idea this is coming. It's going to have an effect on me. And what is that effect going to be? I have no idea. And so there's a lot of nervousness. So I think one of the things I'm going to try to do while I'm here today is to provide information that may help calm down the nerves, help people feel a little less anxious. So I did have dinner last night with Stacy and Lydia and Mira. Did I get that? That's the hardest one for me. And Jeff. And so I know some of the concerns. And also, considering that you've been at it for 2 years, there still seems to be a lack of clarity on what is happening in other states. So, for example, it seems that people think that if you're in New Jersey and you have a baby, you only get 6 weeks. This is not true. Because we've had paid, what you have to realize is we've had paid medical in 5 states since the 1940s. This is like 70 years already that we've had paid medical in California, New Jersey, New York, Rhode Island, and Hawaii. The plans have been solvent. There's never been a problem of insolvency in any of these plans. There's been no pushback from employers saying, oh my God, we have paid disability insurance in this as a public program in this state. How am I ever going to manage my workforce? None of that has occurred. So what you need to understand is that in a state like New Jersey, for the maternity part, you have up to 26 weeks, God forbid you should ever need it. I mean, typically, you get whatever the doctor says you need, and you receive the payment from the state for that period. So typically, people might need sometimes the doctor will tell you to stop working 2 weeks before your due date. In a vaginal birth, doctors typically recommend 6 weeks after. For a cesarean, they recommend 8 weeks after. And so it can be anywhere from 6 to 10 weeks on the disability part. And when that is over, you get 6 weeks of bonding leave. So typically, you are going to have between 12 and 14 weeks in New Jersey during which you are collecting partial wage replacement. So that's the first thing. It may be that we only got 6 weeks with family, and of course, as you may know, we're moving towards 12 weeks. I'll talk a little bit about that as well. But it was never the case that you only had 6 weeks. Long before you had the bonding leave, you already had a substantial amount of time to recover. And in California, because they have many different laws governing these things, a woman who has a baby typically can get, without any special medical necessity, can get 16 weeks of partial wage replacement for the maternity part of it, and then the 6 weeks of paid family leave. So those are the programs I know the best, having studied one and having lived through the other. But just to clarify that, so these programs have always been extremely generous in that regard. I guess the second thing to say is that the family part is so cheap. It is a crime that we don't have it in every single state. So just to give you an example, what we find in both California and New Jersey is that we fund the family part at 0.08 of 1%, 8/100th of 1% of payroll funds it. So let's say you are a worker making $10 an hour, working 40 hours a week. It costs you 32 cents a week. It would be even lower, but one of the compromises that we made in New Jersey with the business community, and somebody will have to explain to me why the business community even wanted this, because family is completely employee paid. But the business community insisted that the wage base should be the unemployment insurance wage base and not the Social Security wage base. So workers pay for the family part on the first $34,400 of earnings. Imagine what the rate would be if it was on the Social Security wage base, which is over $100,000. Right? It would be even lower than 0.08. Or you could have 12 weeks for no more than 0.08. I mean, it's like that. You know, that's really the situation. So so that's the first thing to say about it. In every single state that has it so far, workers fully fund the family part. If you run this as family part funded by workers and medical as a joint responsibility, you will have to have two trust funds. On the question of solvency, what we did is we estimated what it was going to cost, and in the beginning, in New Jersey, we made the initial premium 20% above our estimate, built up the reserve, and then we have a look back, which I think you have here anyway for workers' comp. If that reserve is getting too big, we reduce the rate. If that reserve is going down faster than we thought, we increase the rate. We have never had to increase the rate. It started at 0.10 and is now down to 0.08 of 1% of payroll. So FAMLI is very inexpensive. You know, these things loom large. Your parent is dying and you want to be with them, okay. But if you look across the labor force as a whole, how many people are in a position where they have a dying parent and need to take off? The same thing is true. The fertility rate in this country is not that high. We're barely at replacement. So the number of people in the workforce who are going to have a baby at one time is not that great. If it's funded across all workers, then the rate is very low. So that's the family part. On the medical, you'll have to figure out how you want to handle it. Most of the states, there are two states where it's completely employee paid. That's California, which already has experience with it, and Connecticut, which set it up that way, but hasn't actually seen how it works yet. But so you have two states where it's completely employee paid. The other states, it's a shared responsibility between employers and employees for the medical part. And there are different formulas, and in New Jersey, small employers pay less, big employers pay more, but you can work on those formulas yourself and figure it out. As an economist, and I'm pretty sure you'll agree with me, even though I have never been able to convince the public of this at all, how you write the law has nothing to do with who actually pays the tax or pays the premium. And my simple example of that is, let's say you have an IT company here and you are an employee of that IT company, and the company wants to move you to a subsidiary that they have in Silicon Valley. Taxes in Colorado are low. Taxes in California are high, including the least of it is the family and medical leave insurance. That's the least of it. I mean, you think about the property taxes, the wage taxes, the income taxes. Okay, so given that, how do you get an employee to agree to move from the job in Colorado to the job in Silicon Valley? What do you have to do as the employer? You have to raise their pay so that their net pay doesn't go down. So on paper, when they get to California, they're paying all those taxes. But the reality is that the employer raised their pay so that their net pay was unchanged. And so the incidence of that tax in California falls on the employer and not on the employee. Trying to get people to understand that is really hard. The optics are not good. Everybody wants to be able to think of it as employers benefit, employees benefit. It should be a shared responsibility. And the question is how we want to divide up the medical part. The family part shouldn't even be a question. It's so little. In fact, the problem is that the deduction from your paycheck is so little that unless somebody tells you you have this benefit, you don't even know you have it. Okay, Social Security comes out of your paycheck, you can see it. That's a number you can actually see. It's a big enough number. But 32 cents, your paycheck goes up and down by 32 cents or more anyway, depending on the number of days in the month, depending on whether something happened. You know, there's many reasons why people's pay goes up and down week to week or month to month, and 32 cents change is never going to be noticed by a low-wage worker. In New Jersey, given that we cap it at we stop collecting when you hit the UI wage base, it doesn't cost anybody more than $52 a year. Nobody pays more than $1 a week, and low-wage workers paying 32 cents. So family is, I think, a non-issue. It can be employee paid. The other could be a shared responsibility, and in most of the states it is. In D.C., so D.C. has a problem you don't have here because it's not a state, and because Congress can tell it what it can and can't do. D.C. cannot tax any worker who doesn't live in D.C. Well, if you know D.C., it's tiny, surrounded by Maryland and Virginia. Most of the people who work in D.C. live in Maryland or Virginia. So the only way to have paid or have family and medical leave insurance is if it's all employer paid. And it is 100% employer paid in D.C. So that's the state that has it 100% employer paid because they have this peculiarity. They can't have it any other way. And then we have 2 states where it's completely worker paid, and then the others where it's a combination. So you can work that out for yourselves, how you think will work best in the state. So let me talk a few minutes. I guess I'll talk about solvency next. None of the funds has had a problem with solvency. Some of them have been around for 60 or 70 years and never had a problem with solvency. And in California, where we have the longest experience, where if you get hit by a car and you are out of commission for a year, you will collect for 52 weeks. So you can collect for 52 weeks for getting hit by a car or having cancer or some other horrible thing. You can collect for 26 weeks for having a baby. This is way more than anybody is talking about here. 6 weeks for family, and that is going up over time now. For 1% of payroll, and no solvency problems. Has never ballooned out of control, has never become $1 billion, whatever it would be, some number that you could imagine. And I'll say this about the actuary. I hope there is an actuary who can figure this out without having any previous experience with it in the state. Here's how we did it in New Jersey. We were the second state. We said, California already has it. And there were models at that time, but whoever had the models wanted to charge you. The legislature didn't want to put any money up, and my little center didn't have any money, but I did have a graduate student. So I sent a graduate student with a spreadsheet to work for a while in the Office of Legislative, whatever it is, that marks up these things for New Jersey. We looked at California, and then we asked the question, well, we know that immigrant women in childbearing age have more children than other women in childbearing age. How does our immigrant population in childbearing age compare to California's? I can't even remember if it was higher or lower, adjust up or down. How about the age of the working population? How many people will have to take off to care for an elderly parent? Adjusted it, on a spreadsheet, we adjusted it up or down. And when we got down and we thought it was going to be 0.08, we said, okay, we'll charge 0.10 until we see how it works. Okay, it is now 0.08, we were right. And that is all that we did. That is all that we did, and it turned out to be sufficient. So I don't know whether that reassures anybody, but the thing is we have lots of experience with this. These programs do not become insolvent, and having that look back and having that period, usually you begin collecting the funds a year before you begin paying the benefits. So you are collecting funds for what you think you're going to need in that year and for the reserve you think you're going to need. And initially, somehow you have to cover the administrative costs, and that's done in a variety of ways. One way of covering the administrative cost is that the legislature allocates funds for that, and then the fund pays it back over time. So the fund doesn't have to come up with it all at once. So that you can be, when you have that year where you're building up your fund, you're building in the administrative costs over some period of time, not all of it to be paid in 1 year. But, you can discuss this among yourself and see how you want to do that. I do recommend that you talk to a state like California, which really does track a lot of information about people who take leave, and get an idea from them of what kind of computer system they needed, what kind of administrative costs they have, what can they tell you. Now, they did already have a trust fund, so they had some infrastructure in place, so this won't be everything you need, but it might give you some ideas of the magnitude. You would not want to talk to New Jersey, because New Jersey had the oldest computer system you can imagine, our choice in New Jersey was, did we want to know whether the person taking leave was white or non-white, or did we want to know if they were male or female? Because that's all the room they had to be able to give us any information. So, their costs weren't very high, and they didn't deliver very much information for them. So you probably don't want to go with New Jersey, but you might try talking to some of the other states just to get a better handle on that. So I don't really think that solvency is going to be an issue for you. Knowing how generous. Oh, the other thing about California that I didn't mention, they also have the highest cap. So high-income people in California get more than $1,000 a week in the benefit, compared with the other states where it's usually around $600 or so that the cap takes effect. So it's always a percentage of something. In New Jersey, it's a percentage of the worker earning the average wage in the state, so it gets capped at something. But in California, it's not only that it's 52 weeks, but that the maximum you could get is over $1,000. And that you only need 300 hours of work in the preceding 5 quarters to be eligible. So broad eligibility, high cap, 52 weeks, 1% of payroll, and they're solvent. So you just have to keep that in mind. I don't know what the actuary is going to find, but we already know what this costs. It's not like we need the most econometrically sophisticated studies to find out. I'll talk about the insurance aspects of it because there are proposals out there that I can't understand. This is not one size fits all. This is setting a floor. Many employers today have generous benefits. What we do in other states, at least the ones I'm familiar with, is we allow for coordination of benefits. So if you were an employer who had disability insurance for maternity, but had 2 weeks of paid leave for the non-birth parent, you're paying 100% for that one. You're paying a premium for this one. What this does for you is for the non-birth parent, they collect whatever you're going to set as the amount that people get. Let's say it's 70%. I don't know what you're going to set it at. They would get 70% from the state program, and you would only have to top it off at 30%. It's a major cost saving for generous employers. If you think about the disability insurance, I know the insurance industry is concerned about it. Will they lose all disability insurance? Really, what happens is they need to come up with a new product for which there is a much larger market. Only some employers can afford disability insurance for their workers, and then generally only for some of their workers. But if workers collect the first 70% from the state, and you had a program that provided 90%, what insurance companies have to come up with is what they've done in the case of Medicare, and that is a wraparound or supplementary insurance program. So you get the first 70%. Having the baby, you get the first 70% from the state, and you get the last 20% from this wraparound insurance policy that your employer has bought. Disability insurance, paid disability insurance from employers is a much larger market if all it has to be is 20% of people's income than if it has to be 90%. So I don't know how wide, I mean, we know that employers told us that, the generous employers told us they had major cost savings. We had some employers tell us that it was 60% of the benefit cost related to disability and people taking leave when they had a baby. So anyway, the generous employers will benefit from this. The other employers will not lose from it. Turnover goes down. Both the employers reported a decrease in turnover. People return to the same employer. Workers, we did do an employee survey when we were doing California, and they told us also, because we had done it back in 2004, in the first half of 2004, before it went into effect, and then again in 2009, 2010. After it went into effect, and we could just see what had happened to turnover, what had happened to morale. The question of won't the co-workers be unhappy with it? It turned out less unhappy after paid than before, and hardly anybody is unhappy because everybody realizes that could be me. And so people do pick up the slack without resenting it. We did not find workers resenting the fact that the work is now being shared among more people. So that's part of it. It's a great advantage for small employers. I know that often we hear that this will be a burden for small employers. So one thing I can tell you is that the states that have it take away the paperwork burden from the HR department or from the small employer. The State Department does all of the paperwork. And the employer gets notified but doesn't have to do any of the paperwork. The approval or disapproval comes from the state. And the state does disapprove. I mean, if a person is applying for a leave who is not eligible for it, they will disapprove. Also, the states have enforcement and fraud mechanisms. So if a doctor has said that somebody is eligible and the state investigates and they're not, that's a case of fraud, and there will be enforcement actions. So a doctor might send a note to your little HR department figuring you don't have an enforcement agency in your business and not worry too much about whether this is exactly what it should be. I'm not saying that doctors do that, but I've heard that some doctors will do that. I don't know them personally. I've never had a doctor that would do that. Anyway, they're not going to do it when they're sending the thing to the, if they have to send a notice to the state, that's a much bigger ask and a much bigger leap because the state has enforcement mechanisms. So I think this helps with a lot of either actual or perceived problems. I don't know, what they are exactly, but there's that piece of it. What I have found talking to small employers is that they know their employees, they know their employees' families. A child has something horrible happen to them. The wife has a kid who has a hole in the heart, and we have to go through the neonatal intensive care unit and surgeries on an infant. I haven't met a small employer yet who says, well, the FMLA doesn't require me to hold their job for them, so I'm just going to fire them. I have not met a small employer who said that. No, they said, we're family here. We care about our workers. Our problem is we don't have the deep pockets. We're small. If they're going to be out for a few weeks, we have to hire a temp, we have to pay people overtime, we have to find a way to get that work done, and that costs us money, and we do not have a way to pay them. So if there is a state program that provides them with partial wage replacement, and I don't have to do it, this is great because I care about those people, and in my heart, I've been really unhappy that I could not provide them with some means of staying alive. Okay, I held the job, but I couldn't provide them with a means of staying alive. It's like they welcome it. The other thing is, so I'm coming from New Jersey, and I don't know enough about Colorado, but New Jersey is headquarters for many of the companies that are on the 100 best places for working mothers. That means they have all of these generous benefits. You're a small little startup. You want to be in New Jersey because you want to be near J&J, because you're a startup that is IT for them or whatever it is you're producing. You hope that they're going to want to buy your product. You want to have that close interaction with them. And so you want to locate in New Jersey. And this I actually know because we ran a program for young women to get them into jobs and get them prepared. New Jersey is a research university, but we have many first-generation college students. And these young women have no idea how you get a job anywhere, how you dress for an interview. We even take them out to dinner in a fancy restaurant so that the first time is not on their job interview. So we can tell them how you use the silverware from the outside in, which glass is yours, which bread plate is yours. A lot of things you have to teach people. But the point is that we know for a fact that the big companies come recruiting our best undergraduates, and especially the ones who have been through our programs in which we prepare them for the world of work. So how does a small employer compete? And in New Jersey, a small employer can say, well, I cannot give you this benefit and that benefit, but if you're in New Jersey, you have whatever time you need to recover from childbirth, and you will receive disability for it. You have 6 weeks to bond with the baby. If you're not the non-birth parent, you have 6 weeks to bond with the baby. You have time to take off to care for a sick wife, a sick parent. You have paid sick days in this state. Okay, you have all of these benefits, which may not exactly match J&J, but they are right up there. They are valuable and make it possible for the small employers to compete with the really good employers that we have in the state of New Jersey. So it has not been a hard sell when we have gone out and actually spoken to the employers. This has not been a difficult thing for them to be able to see their self-interest in all of this. For the large employers, this is really small in the grand scheme of things. And so we certainly have not had, and the medical has been around for a long time, which is a big piece of it, since FAMLI could be employee paid. We have not had employers say this is a job killer. we have so much abuse, we can't deal with it. You can remember that in California, the paid family was passed under Gray Davis, and Schwarzenegger ran saying, I will rescind it as soon as I'm in office. I have heard what the business community said about it. He takes office, nothing happens. Because once employers actually have the experience of it and can see that for them it was a non-event, there's no constituency knocking on the governor's door saying, oh my God, this is strangling us, you must get rid of it. And meanwhile, all of the families in California who have used it love it. So you have lots of people happy to have the benefit, and once employers have experience with it, I understand the anxiety before you have experience, but once employers have experienced it, there's no clamor for rescinding it. The same thing happened in New Jersey. Corzine was the governor when we passed it, and Christie was the governor a year or two later. And Christie also ran on a program of rolling back paid family leave. It didn't happen because businesses are not clamoring for it. In the 60 or 70 years that we've had the paid medical, there's no huge coalition of businesses in any of the 5 states saying, this has been killing me for 70 or 80 years, won't you please do something about it now? It hasn't happened. So the point is, I understand the anxiety before you have it. I will say this was in Connecticut, and it was around the paid sick days. There was also anxiety even about having 5 paid sick days. And what Connecticut did in the period between the time the law was passed and the time it went into effect is they had the people who were going to be their enforcement, the little enforcement group, available to any employer who had a question. If you want to know whether this law applies to me and to which of my employees, they send somebody out to your place of business to look over the situation and say, yes, these are the employees that it applies to, and these are the ones that it doesn't. And I'm sure this happened broadly, but the place I visited where they told me about this was a assisted living facility, and they had candy stripers, young women who came after school, high schoolers who came after school to talk with the aged people, give a little social interaction, and bring them their dinners. Were they going to be eligible for paid sick days if they were out? That was the question. No, they were volunteers and they were not eligible. But they told me the state sent somebody who took a look at their entire operation and said, these are the employees that need to be covered, and those volunteers not. Or in Connecticut, we interviewed, this was the HR manager for family-owned 4 little supermarkets. And this is also paid sick days, but you'll get the point of it. He testified against paid sick days. Oh, they told him you have all these teenage boys and girls. They help with the cashier. They load the bags. They take them out to the car. They do they stock the shelves. How are you even going to manage it? The paperwork is going to kill you, and every kid is going to take off, and you're going to have to pay them. So he testified against it because that's what he thought was going to happen. Who can blame him? He had no experience with it. Now we do our survey, and we always have a place on it. Would you be willing to be interviewed? Have the researchers come to your place of business and talk to you about it. So we come to his place of business. He still hated the fact that there was a state law that told him something he had to do. No employer wants a state law that tells you what you have to do. We said, okay, we understand that, but how did it affect your business? Okay, he said I could lie about it, but the truth is it had no effect. It took a few hours to set up a spreadsheet. These kids switch shifts. If they have a test the next day after their shift, they switch with some other teenager. It turned out to be hardly any teenager ever accumulated enough hours to ever take anything, and nobody wanted it. The same is true of waitresses. They live on tips. Getting minimum wage for the days you're out is not it. They will switch shifts. In the work that we did, it's the people the businesses that complain the most have the fewest people taking some of these things. So, okay, so what else would you like to know about? I've talked about the solvency. I've talked about the insurance. Oh, yeah, so the insurance aspect, the one proposal that I cannot understand, and anyway it will never pass, is that we should pay for it out of Social Security. So that feels to me like a placeholder for somebody who doesn't want to say, I'm opposed to having family and medical leave insurance. But what employer and what employee wants to take money out of Social Security now, knowing that Social Security has its own issues, for the money to be put back in 30 or 40 years when this employee finally retires. So no actuary is going to sign off on that particular plan. We could be pretty sure. And I never do understand what it is about insurance that escapes people who make that. So, for example, if you think about car insurance, we don't say, I'm a safe driver, I don't think I'll ever have an accident. Why should I pay for car insurance for other people who might have accidents? And if I'm in an accident and I total somebody else's car, no problem. I'll just take that out of my Social Security, I'll pay them for the car that I've totaled, and I'll delay my retirement until I've paid back Social Security for the cost of that car. Nobody proposes that, because we all understand the point of insurance. You hope to God you never have to use the insurance. You'd like to be a non-participant. Who wants to be a participant in car insurance and collect? Really. So, but we do require that everybody has it, because we know that however good a driver you are, things happen. And probably you don't want to have to take it out of your Social Security and delay your retirement until you've paid it back. That's basically self-financing. That's not insurance. So I think most people get that, and I can't understand this proposal, but so I wanted to be sure to say that. What else to tell you? Yes.
My name is Julie Martinez. I work with 9to5 Colorado. I work with an organization that advocates for working women, and paid leave is a really, really important issue because, as we know, women are caregivers in our society and, are also workers, and they, juggle with these experiences. And actually, so just last week, CBS Denver, a local news channel, covered the story of a woman named Suzette Brunette from Aurora, Colorado, and her children are actually having to schedule skull surgery so their brain development can actually be healthy. And so she needs to take time off of work. She's asking for 2 weeks, but it will be unpaid. And so she's actually creating a GoFundMe page to cover some of that cost. And so it's really unfortunate because, she needs to be there
Right.
to for the recovery of her 2 children, the twins. And, I think that for, single mothers or just for working parents, those are situations that happen. And so I'm just wondering if you can talk about, what a program needs to have in order to really benefit like low-income families and, working
That's
kids.
really good. I
And
should have,
also-
that's right.
Yeah,
That's
and
really good.
Yeah, and also just from the worker perspective, because, I think that, we want to make sure that, people have access.
Right. So in the beginning, we didn't understand what we were doing, and that would include me in New Jersey. We thought of this as insurance for the FMLA. But come to find out that 48% or so of workers do not have the protections of the FMLA. So that actually didn't really work. Now, it does not mean that there's also mythology out there that low-income people do not take the paid family or the paid medical. This is in the states that have it. This is not true. They don't take it in proportion to the numbers that we would imagine should be eligible. If in general, some percentage of the workforce takes it, but among people earning less than a certain amount, the percentage is lower, this is a problem. And we do know that if you make it more inclusive, it makes a big difference. But the thing that we are now really set on, and the lesson that we have learned, is that the most important thing is that whatever you pass needs to be inclusive. And there are 3 things that make it inclusive. And you will see these things in all of the new legislation. And you will see California and New Jersey running to catch up with the other states by amending the laws that we already have. And here are the 3 things that we need. The first thing is we need a graduated replacement rate. Nobody who is making minimum wage can live in California was 55%, in New Jersey it was 2/3. If you're making minimum wage, you cannot live on half or 2/3 of the minimum wage. You need 90 or 100% in order to be able to live. So it needs to be graduated so that people can feel that people would take the leave and then come back before they were ready to come back because they couldn't afford to stay out any longer. So you stay out when you absolutely can't work. I mean, we have women returning to work. About 20% of women in this country return to work 2 weeks after giving birth. If any woman in this room has had a baby, they know how incredible that is. So, okay. So the first thing is it has to be high enough. The second thing is you have to have a job guarantee, that you have a job to come back to. And so the family part of all of this has a job guarantee for every worker. If you take the family piece, you have a job to come back to. On the medical, we're still struggling with that. But if we go to a national, we will certainly try to push for having a job protected. At a minimum, if you can't get, the family should be job protected. If you can't get the medical job protected, you want an anti-discrimination clause, which we all have, an anti-retaliation clause in the law, that employers can't retaliate, because workers are also concerned not only that the employer might replace them, but they might hold the job. You're a valued employee, you come back, but they might not treat you so nice afterwards. Okay, so I've seen that happen. Everybody else gets a new updated computer, and you took a maternity leave, and you come back, and somehow they don't have money for your computer to be updated. So no retaliation is a minimum for the own medical, and job to come back to for the family. And if you could get, and of course all the workers who have FMLA, of course, have job protection even for the medical part. So we're talking about the 48% that doesn't have it. But generally speaking, I think employers do not fire you because you had a baby and you took a few weeks off for that. So if we can get the few weeks off, the 6 weeks for having the baby, and then the 6 weeks where they can't retaliate when they can't fire you because you're taking family leave, that will help a lot of workers. So that's the second thing. And the third thing we need is an inclusive definition of family. So what we find, especially in low-income families, but in other families as well, people are living in multi-generational families now. And so the mother may go out to work, and an aunt or a grandmother may be taking care of the children. When that aunt or grandmother needs help, the children as adults need to be able to take time off from work to help them as well as their mother. So more definitions of family that meet the needs of people. Another big one is siblings. You get to be a certain age, you're too old to take care of your grown children. They need to take care of each other. So you need people to be able to take off to care for a sibling if the parent is really not able to do it. So definitions of family that make sense. For the LGBTQ community, I hope I didn't leave anybody out, it's often a question of chosen family. So I mentioned last night in my own family, I have transgender nephew born a niece, transgender niece born a nephew. Family is completely supportive, and they don't need to have a chosen family. But as we know, there are some people who are disowned by their family when this comes out, and they need to have a chosen family. They do not get to choose the family on the day they need to take the leave. It's just like when you become employed, they ask you who your next of kin is in case of an emergency. Who do we notify? It's the same thing. If there's going to be chosen family, then you have to set it up so it's sensible. You tell the employer, these are the 3 or 4 people that I'm really close to. I take care of them, they take care of me. And those are your chosen family. And of course, if you have a falling out, it's just like you had a divorce. You have a divorce, you have to change who your next of kin is and who to notify, and the same thing is true. But it's not on the day that you're taking the leave that it comes up. So I think these are the points about it, that it needs to be designed from the point of view of the worker. The main thing we have found is it needs to be designed to be inclusive in order for more of the low income or single moms or people in that situation to be able to take it. And California has changed its requirements now and has seen an increase in the percentage of people taking family just in a little bit of time since they changed it. And there is a longer study that covers the period before they changed it, which Tara can tell you what this means. It's a triple difference in difference in difference methodology. They compare people with children under the age of 1 with people with children over the age of 1, people before there was a law with people after there was a law, and with people in other states nearby that don't have the law. When they get all done, that research, which is fairly recent, shows that in California, having the law has reduced the percentage of people, families that go into fall below the poverty line after the birth of a child by 10%. So this is not small. To reduce the falling into poverty after the birth of a child by 10% is pretty significant. So we know that we are reaching low-income families. We'd like to reach more of them, but we'll do the best we can.
Dr. Applebaum, this is Stacy Campbell, and I had a question. Thanks for kind of sharing the three items that you thought needed to be there for inclusiveness. And so I was interested when you talked about the definition of family, and then you went on to say that, it's not on the day that you need to leave. And so can you talk a little bit more about how that's set up?
Yeah, so if the relationship is by blood or marriage, then the law tells you who you can take it for. And the recent states, include, I wasn't so happy that they include the mother-in-law, because now your husband can say you can take off for his mother, but okay. In-laws, grandparents, siblings, right? The laws will tell you. Anybody who stood in loco parentis, that was always the case. So if you're raised by an aunt, you can definitely take off for that person. So the law will tell you for that. The only place that you have to specify is for chosen family. And that you can decide in the state what you want to do. Is it 4 people? Most people who have a family have 3 or 4 people who can take care of them and who they feel obligated to care for. But just at the intake, you ask, who do we notify in case of an accident? You can ask, are you going the route of chosen family? And if you are, who do you specify? So, we can handle it in those ways.
And so you've seen that with that employers have done.
That's what's happening.
Part of their intake.
Yeah, and you have to realize what a small proportion of the workforce that is going to be. The main thing about it is that we've broadened the definition of family by blood or marriage.
So the way that we had set up the agenda was to have remarks from Dr. Applebaum. The task force can go grab lunch. We'll start up again, and then we'll do the Q&A. You all still okay with that approach? Okay, so all right, and task force, I've just been informed, the lunch will be brought directly to you. So to allow the public a chance to stretch their legs, we're going to start up again at 5 minutes after noon. So get your questions ready, and we'll have a nice discussion. Thanks, Dr. Applebaum. Go ahead and get started again. This is Q&A with Dr. Applebaum. I'm going to ask Hadley Manning to get us started here in a moment. But one piece of business. Louise, do you mind holding up that pad? Okay, Louise, you hold up that pad. All right, everybody who would like to address the task force during the public comment period, please sign your name on that. And if you'll do us a favor, just keep that thing moving a little bit, because I believe people are going to filter in for the next 10 or 15 minutes. We want them to know that they have an opportunity to. All right? All right. Well, Hadley, go ahead with the first question for Dr. Applebaum.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Applebaum, for being here, and I'm sorry to ask you questions while you're eating your lunch, but here we are. First of all, just to clarify for the public audience and for other members of the task force who may not know, Independent Women's Forum, the group that I represent, is responsible for advocating for the Social Security Earned Leave Plan that Dr. Applebaum mentioned. So thank you for mentioning our plan. I understand we might have some disagreement about it, but this is a federal policy proposal, and so my questions will pertain just to the work of the task force, which is a state policy matter. Judith raised the issue of low-income families, and I want to ask another question to that point. Even in your work, you've acknowledged the distributionary effects of these programs can be negative, where low-income workers are all taxed to fund the program, but a disproportionately small share of the benefits go to that population. And I appreciate you naming some of the factors that can alleviate that problem. But I want to ask if any state has avoided this outcome, or what the best state model has been in terms of meeting those factors you described.
Well, we're just moving in that direction now. I would not call it negative for anybody, because on that one hand, they're not using it in the proportion we think they should be using it in. On the other hand, tens of thousands of low-wage workers have benefited. So it's not as if they're not using it. And the state of California has done a couple of things. Besides fixing how much money you get, that you have job protection during the family part of it, and that you have a better definition of family, which has increased the take-up rate now in general and reduced the poverty rate for low-income people. But they've run a huge media campaign with the most beautiful ads, the kind that make tears come to your eyes, you know, about fathers being able to take leave. And that is one of the things that we've discovered. In 2004, before it was implemented, what you would like looking at the bonding leave is you would like to see a 50-50, half fathers, half mothers. So we're aiming to get to 50-50. At the time that they went into effect, 17% of fathers took any bonding leave at all. By the time 5 years had gone by, 30% of fathers aiming for that 50. And by now, I don't know the exact figure, but it's well above 30%. And so one of the things that we know is the importance of having fathers take that leave, both in terms of the lifetime relationship with the child, although we haven't followed the whole lifetime. For many years afterwards, the fathers who took that leave have a closer and better relationship with the child. But the other thing is that it begins to equalize the work done in the household. So fathers who take that time off will change a diaper compared to the others who will read a story at bedtime to the child, you know. Changing that relationship within the household, as I'm sure you know yourself, also changes the ability for women to participate fully at work and not to be the sole caretaker with every responsibility falling on them.
Can I ask a follow-up about this point?
Yeah, sure.
I'm sorry. I know other members of the task force have a lot of questions too, so I'll be quick. But I'm sure you've seen the Pew Research chart that compares the generosity of paid leave programs to the gender wage gap. And it demonstrates that in countries that have more generous paid family leave, there are larger gender wage gaps. I don't know what your response to that is.
So actually, I actually did some work. Some foundation was the best grant I ever got to go around the world and find out how companies in other countries manage to have all these generous leave policies and also to make a profit. When I came back, every reporter who ever interviewed me, the first question is, so which country has the best policies? And what I discovered is that while we have very poor family leave policies in this country, we have way more policies having to do with gender equality in the workplace than any other country. In Italy, they were translating our HR volumes into Italian because they were under pressure in the north. In the south, they have plenty of unemployment. But the north of Italy faced a situation like at the time that I was in the field, like we have here, with very low unemployment. They wanted to attract women. They had to convince the mothers that it was going to be okay for their daughters to work in these jobs. And they had to think about, what do they tell managers about how you manage what is now a gender-integrated workforce, which we didn't have before. So, you know, and I worked 5 summers in Germany. The minute I saw the size of the refrigerators and the fact that the school day ends before lunch, I understood why they don't have such high for women in Germany. This is, of course, also changing now, but it's really a forced choice between having children and having a career. Okay, because you have to go shopping every day. It looked like the dorm refrigerators to me. Now, wealthy people have a freezer in the basement if they have a basement. But ordinary German workers living in an apartment have a refrigerator that looks like a dorm refrigerator because women are expected to go out and buy food fresh all the time. And things like sports, music, art, these are community-based. Every community has a swimming pool. Every community has a program for children. Kids come home with tons of homework. The mother is supposed to supervise it. So you run into situations in which the equal treatment of women in the workplace is a problem. And that is definitely true. If you look at the Nordic countries, of course, you don't have that gender wage gap. Okay, women in female-dominated occupations, because they've always had women working, right? Women in female-dominated occupations that make as much as women as men in male-dominated occupations for equivalent amounts of education and so on. But once you get to the continental countries and certainly to the southern countries, then you run into that situation. It has nothing to do with the leave policies. It has everything to do with the fact that employment of women in jobs that are not marginal is a recent experience in some of these countries, way more recent than in the U.S.
Thank you.
So we'll go Jared, then Edwin.
Great, thank you, and thanks for the presentation. So first, just an observation and I think a request for the task force. So the chart that was distributed that has the state comparison is already out of date because there is so much momentum on this issue. So I did want to flag, and then, you know, if we can replace the chart as soon as it's updated, as I'm sure it will be. Right. It doesn't reflect as
every month it's updated.
So, and I think that's their current, but I'm sure they're working on it since they're brand new updates. But did want to just flag the California expansion that you mentioned, not yet reflected on the chart in terms of number of weeks, but more to the point, and would love if you could speak a little bit to Oregon is not on the chart as well. And, you know, my understanding on the measures that you talked about, Oregon is fairly generous, so did want to acknowledge it.
We don't have the experience yet, but
right.
I think it is going to speak to the question of whether low-wage workers can really take it.
Yeah, because am I correct? It's the first state that it's the lowest wage workers will have 100% wage replacement.
Other states have 90%, but this is the first with 100%.
Okay.
But I can't really comment on it because we have to see it in practice, but I'm optimistic.
Yep. And my understanding is it's also the third now with the family definition that you spoke to.
Right.
And did just want to note, and I don't know if you have any thoughts on this as well, or there's anything else to share on the family definition, that our country's largest employer, which is the federal government, has used the same family definition for 5 decades now, starting with bereavement leave and in the 90s, annual and sick leave, including the ability to accumulate up to 12 weeks is my understanding. So, you know, did want to acknowledge it's a development, as you mentioned, in recent states, but there are also models that show it works, and the fact that they keep expanding on it is something else just to lift up. And there's I did submit a document on this to the Family Task Force resource page that I don't think is uploaded yet since I just sent it, but did want to flag that there will be more information on that point as well. I don't know if you have any other thoughts on that.
No. Maybe there was a question earlier before we were all together about how PTO works with this. So anybody who's had a baby knows that you're not on vacation when you're having a baby and recovering from childbirth. This is not a vacation. Anybody who has been with a dying parent understands that that's not a vacation. So Just like employers could have a disability program that topped off the state benefit, workers could voluntarily decide that they want to be 100% of the state benefit is 70%, and it's capped at a certain level. Too low for your high-income workers, who are the ones really who have generous PTO. They can choose to top it off themselves, but they shouldn't be required to use that up before they get the state program. So you'll have to think about that. You don't want a thing that says you must use all your pay time off, your vacation time, your sick time, whatever it is, before you start the state program. But workers could voluntarily choose to top off the state benefit out of their own PTO, which high-paid workers likely will do.
Okay. Edwin?
Yes, Edwin Zoe, Mama. Top one, I want to be clear and transparent.
Edwin, we need you to speak up.
Okay. Oh, I just wanted some clarification with that Pew Research. You're saying that there's a correlation between benefits to gender pay gap based on causation. Is that correct?
There's no causation.
Okay.
I'm saying the exact opposite. Okay, the causation of the gender pay gap has to do with norms in some of these countries, like in Italy, in southern Italy, where mothers don't want their daughters to work because that's the old-fashioned view.
So there just happens to be a correlation, but
But not causation, exactly.
Causation, okay. Exactly. And then the second question I have is, in terms of, you mentioned that the rate in New Jersey is 0.8%, is that correct?
No, 0.08
0.08, okay.
of 1%.
1%, is that just for the maternity portion, or is it all?
No, but maternity is part of disability.
Okay,
This is for bonding with the child,
okay.
or for taking care of a sick parent, or a sibling, or whatever.
Well, the reason I'm asking this, because we don't have any of those, we're starting from ground zero, what is that rate? Well, what does that rate look like?
Well, you're
saying in California it's 1% all in, correct?
All in, right, but the family part is still only 0.08 in California as well.
0.08 for the family.
For the family part.
Okay.
Yeah, it's own medical. That's what people, right, for the family part, people come back pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Okay, you're bonding with the baby, okay, that people take. But your mother had a stroke, you need 2-3 weeks to get her settled in whatever situation she's going to be in, so that you can return to work. You don't need 6 or 12 weeks to get your mom settled.
Yeah. So it's in California's case, it's reasonable to assume that 0.98% is for medical.
That's correct.
So that's really the heavy lift is going to be done.
And they have the heaviest lift, right? Because they have 52 weeks,
Yeah.
and because the top benefit is over $1,000 a week.
Well, I'm saying it's relative to maternity. That's what
We're talking about maternity, that's part of that, yes. Maternity, they could only get 26 weeks. But typically, as I said before, they will get anywhere from 6 to, for these things, in California, up to 16 weeks of paid leave out of the disability.
The reason I'm asking these questions is for myself.
Yeah.
I want to be able to know where the heavy lift is going to come from. Is it going to be on the maternity side, or is it going to be on the medical side? And based on
maternity is medical.
Well, I'm saying medical meaning not so much bonding and
childbirth. We're talking about childbirth.
Yeah.
That's on the medical side.
From my perception, that has to do with bonding and childbirth.
No, that's not how it is in any state.
Do we have any number in terms of what those numbers?
It's a small proportion. So the medical, having a baby is a big proportion of bonding leave and a small proportion of medical leave.
Okay.
You're much more likely to have a worker with a heart attack than have a worker having a baby. Or think of all the illnesses that a worker could have.
In terms of your experience, in terms of distribution, is it 30%? Is it 50%? Is it?
California could answer that question for you.
I mean, in New Jersey.
New Jersey doesn't track it. I told you what the computer system in New Jersey looks like. You need to go to a state that has modernized its computer system and actually tracks this. But maternity is not a big part. What I can tell you is that maternity is not a big part of the medical leave. It's paid for out of medical, but it's not a big part of it.
Okay.
Because if you look across the workforce, there's just not that many people, and our fertility rate is not that high. There's not that many people having a baby in any given year.
And the last question I have is, what, based upon your expertise, what is a reasonable administrative cost in terms of percentage of the program?
So that's, again, you need to look at the other programs to get that kind of thing.
I'm asking you, what do you think?
I don't have an answer to that, because I can tell you about employers, I can tell you about employees, that's what we survey, that's who we talk to. But the administrative costs are knowable, you just have to talk to each state and see what their administrative costs were. They also may not be, you may need to think this through, because many of the states where the program has been running already have a medical trust fund, right? They already had the paid medical. So for them, they're just adding on the administration of a second trust fund.
All right, so one hygienic. In order to, are we bringing the mics back on? Yeah. Okay, apologize. I was going to say, the people on the phone were not picking up the roof mics. They were only picking up the
So we're good.
these microphones. Yeah, go ahead. Please speak louder, though. All of you. Thanks. Go ahead.
So this is Tara McKinnish. So in your remarks, you talked about solvency issues, and you said that we already have very good information on how much these programs cost. And what I want to clarify that a little bit, because I know that part of our information on cost comes from earlier, where many of these programs had lower wage replacement rates, like maybe only 2/3. So take-up was quite low. And so the downside of that is because there was such a large penalty to using these programs, take-up was very low, which made the program very cheap. And so it seems that just now, their states are starting to change or adopt new programs that have higher wage replacement rates and are doing other things to improve take-up. And we might expect take-up then to increase quite a bit. And so my question is, do we have good information yet on program costs in the case where we have high wage replacement and potentially high take-up?
So the higher wage replacement is probably going to make a difference. We'd have to adjust for that. I don't know that take-up is going to increase that much. It is true that low-wage workers take it. So all of the other groups of workers are definitely taking it in proportion to their presence in the workforce. So there really is, I don't think there's much reason to think that this is going to influence the take-up rates of higher wage workers. What we're really concerned about are the low-wage workers. They already were taking it up in some goodly numbers, just not in proportion. That's where the increase in take-up is going to be. Even if you pay them 90% of their weekly wage, this is a small number. Okay, so you need to keep this in mind. It's not going to be the average, it's not going to go up like by the average wage, it's going to go up by what a low-income worker makes. So we're not talking about huge amounts of increase, either in take-up or in wages. So there will be some increase. That may very well happen. The states that have had it for a while, like California and New Jersey, which are changing their rules, already have built up a large reserve, and these states adjust every year. And so if it turns out that take-up increases more than people think it will, or people were expecting, or more rapidly, they will know it. You'll see the reserves going down, and next year the premium will go up. But I don't imagine that the premium, let's take the family leave part of it, where you're taking it for bonding, and instead of having 6 weeks, you now can have 12 weeks. You know, if it cost before 32 cents a week and it goes up to 64 cents a week, or if you expand the wage base over which it is. If New Jersey expanded its wage base from 34,300 to the over 100,000 that Social Security wage base is, I don't think the rate would have to go up at all to accommodate these changes. So there are ways of thinking about it. But I wouldn't want to leave you with the impression that there are going to be massively high increases, or that there are going to be increases that can't be dealt with, either in the case like of a state like New Jersey of moving to the Social Security wage base without raising the rate, or small increases in the rate.
We got a question from the phone. This is Trish Sullivan. Trish, are you able to pipe in?
Yes. Can you hear me okay?
Sure. Great.
Okay. Let me try this. Hold on. Can you hear me better now?
We can hear you fine. Go ahead.
Okay, great. Hi, Dr. Applebaum. Sorry I couldn't be there in person. I'm with Steamboat Ski and Resort Corporation out in Northwest Colorado. I have a question. If you could talk about if you have experience with the seasonal workforce as well as a transient workforce. So, for example, here in the ski industry, about a third of our employees in peak season comes from out of state to work about 4 to 5 months over the winter period.
Sure. So I can tell you that no state excludes seasonal workers. If they meet the other requirements, then they are covered. I can understand that there might be some question about a job protection, because if they are out for a month in a seasonal situation like that, you're going to have to replace them. You probably cannot hold the job for them. I can understand that piece of it. But there's no place, I mean, their eligibility depends on the eligibility criteria, which is going to be something to do with weeks worked or something to do with amount of income earned. I've given out, and I'm sure they will be able to send you a link to the thing that I've given out that shows for every state, how this is what the eligibility requirements are. And if they meet those eligibility requirements, then they will draw money. If all they've done is worked for you for 2 months, the amount of money but they meet the eligibility requirements, the amount of money they draw will be very little. This came up, I've forgotten the name of the gentleman that I was talking to, but one of the things you have to consider is when you talk about average weekly wage, over what period are you going to be measuring the weekly wage? So in some states, they take in New Jersey, it's very clear. It's a certain minimum. For low-wage workers, it's really clear. Minimum number of weeks at a certain amount of pay. That's no question. The problem is not with the low-wage workers. The problem is really with the high-wage workers, or in your case, with a worker who works for just a month or 2 months and then becomes ill or breaks a leg or whatever it is. What's the period, when you look at their weekly wage to calculate their benefit, what period is that over? And it's generally not over the 1 or 2 months that they worked, because that will give high-wage workers, independent consultants, really opportunities to game the system. Okay? You will decide what it is. Is it going to be, if what we look at is your highest wage in the 2 quarters in which you had your highest wage to calculate it, then the weeks is going to be 16 weeks. So you're a high-wage worker. You know that you want to take off for maternity or whatever it is. You get a job and you get them to pay you $8,000 in 1 month. Your average weekly wage is not $2,000. If it's a period, if it's a state that looks at the 2 quarters of highest pay over the last 5 quarters, it's going to be divided by 2 quarters of, 6 months. It's going to be divided by 26 weeks. So your $8,000 of pay is going to be divided by 26 weeks, and you're not going to get very much. And really, the gaming you have to be concerned about is the gaming by high-wage workers who always have the greater opportunity in any system to game it, to be honest. Okay, they can, especially independent consultants, they can stack their money in some period. You have to have that. The other thing that stops it is that cap. So if you're a consultant and you're typically making $1,500 a week, and you try to game the system, and all you're ever going to get is $600. This is, between the cap and the number of weeks over which the average is calculated. So that may be a calculation you didn't think you had to make, but that has to be one of your parameters. And you can look and see, but I don't really know what each and every state does. But it's not you work for 4 weeks and now we're going to divide by 4. Okay, there's some period of weeks.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Stacy?
This is Stacy Campbell, and I want to kind of step back, and I guess I'm sitting here and I've listened to, and I thank you for the information you provided. What I'm interested in are, what are the challenges that other states have kind of ran into? And I guess maybe if we look at it from, like, we're right here, we're trying to come up with what that plan is going to be. There's a lot of stuff down on the other end. But just kind of getting to that point of what is going to be Colorado's plan? What are the big challenges, like the top three that you see?
So on the employer side, there really has been no pushback. There are not employers who are lining up to say, I'm not saying there's not the occasional employer who has problems. I'm not saying that there's no employers that have problems. The biggest problem for employers from their point of view is covering the work. So anything we can get out there that helps them figure this out is very helpful. So of course what employers tell us uniformly is that we share the work among the remaining employees. But I want to tell you that having visited many, many employers by this time on this question, underneath that little we share the work is the most ingenuity you've ever seen. So an IT company that works on a team basis on different projects makes sure that each of the people is on more than one team. So if you have a team of 4 people and every person is just on that one team and one person is out, that's a quarter of the team that is gone. But if each worker is on at least 2 teams, and especially if they're on 3 teams, okay, and on 3 teams it's less than 10%, and that's what they did. They had people on multiple teams. Okay, I visited a company that's an engineering company, the one where they had a shower for their first male employee, the first baby shower for a male employee right before we got there, and we're very proud of it. They are on government contracts which have a penalty if, in fact, you don't meet the time things. What happens if you have an employee going out? But these are not little companies, right? And what she told me is, and you should have met this woman, you would have loved her. But anyway, what she told me is that when you're project-based, like they are, you have all these government contracts, you always have a project that is winding down at the same time that you have somebody going out on leave. And so they take somebody, and actually what happens when a project winds down in these organizations, that's when people use their PTO. So your project has wound down. The new project isn't starting yet, or the company hasn't gotten the contract for the new project yet. What do? So workers use their PTO during that period. They are very happy to be transferred temporarily to the project that needs a worker, and the one that is winding down could probably do with one less worker. So all I'm saying is that under that we share the work are many, 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 many models. And one of the things that could be helpful is to begin accumulating these stories, because companies are already, right now that people don't get paid, but it doesn't mean they don't take leave. Companies are already dealing with women who have babies. I won't bore you with more stories, but I got 1 million of them, okay? And so what you need to do is collect them from the companies. That's on the employer side. On the employee side, I've already talked about it, the lack of inclusivity.
Kathy?
Hi, I'm Kathy White with the Colorado Fiscal Institute. I have a question about, my question was really around what are some of the best outreach strategies that you've seen?
Good.
I know that part of the administrative and getting people to use the benefit or be aware of the benefit that they have, like if it's a small deduction out of their paycheck or whatever the case may be, do they know that they have it? And from what I understand, the majority of people get their information about the program from their employers. And so what are some of the states doing to boost uptake based on outreach? And has that mostly been done through like working with employers, since that's the #1 place where most employees get their information, or is it mostly done through the state, or is it like, I know California is running this ad campaign, and has that been the most successful way of like looking at going to a third party, advertiser?
That is really a good point, and it will. What California has found is that they have needed, the state legislator has needed to allocate funds specifically for this kind of outreach, because as you say, workers learn about it from their employer. Now, we did not have a big enough sample of people who didn't know they had it to be able to come to any conclusion, or had it and didn't take it. But there's another study that is now up on the website, which actually looked at this and found among the reasons that workers didn't take it, and it could just be that employers didn't know the law themselves, is that in California, where it's only $300 over 5 quarters, Employers said to low-wage workers, you earn too little, you're not eligible. They said to part-time workers, you're part-time, you're not eligible. So there's a lot of misinformation out there. So one thing is a major campaign, like they did in California, to get the word out. That's very important. But the second thing is to reach the workers directly, and Kellogg Foundation funded a project that I looked over it. I did go out at the end and meet the groups because they have these meetings at the end where we're evaluating what we did, and they like it if people like me come to those meetings, and I like to see it for myself. But we discovered there were a couple of things. One of the things they tried was working with the employers. So going to a part of New Jersey where there were a lot of small employers and talking to them. Okay, you reach a certain number of employers. This is not cost effective. Okay, that turned out not to be cost effective. Another thing that we did, so Kellogg funded us for what they call rapid response. We're going to learn, they said failure is as good as success because we learn from failure as well. So we did a whole range of things. There was one where you had, the child care workers who were unionized, so you could meet the child care workers in a group and then give them the information to provide to parents. But each child care worker, these were home child care workers, had 8 or 10 parents. This was not cost effective. We did one that looked like it was working. This was going to those places where they inform people about how you can sign up for the exchange for the Affordable Care Act. In low-income neighborhoods, we have a location, you can come to it and sign up. This worked as long as we paid a person to be there to inform people about it. So we reached hundreds of people. And the minute that our grant ran out and that person wasn't there anymore, it disappeared. The two most successful programs that we had, and which are being replicated without any further funding, that's how successful they are, was going into a health clinic in a low-wage area. This is South LA, Clinica Romero. Now has spread now to Clinica something else, also in South LA, with no input from us. In the beginning, we do the intake and we're so busy, and how do we have time to tell anybody about it? Our job is to treat them when they're here. And it was the promotoros who eventually understood that people have to have time off to come take the kid to the doctor. Otherwise, how is this going to work? Or you have a seriously ill child, the necessity of taking time off to be with that child. And so they began talking within the organization about it. And of course, it becomes clear that people, we have a lot, you're going to have it, somebody's already accumulating this for you, but the health effects of having a parent there when a child is sick, or for your elderly parents having a child there when they're, the health effects are huge. The time to recovery, so much shorter, all of these things. Once the clinic understood it, it's now part of the intake. They have all these tabs. You come in and they go through their tabs, and one of the tabs is, do you know about paid family and medical leave? You don't know about it? Here, let me give you a brochure with just the top points, okay, not all the detail. And here's where you can go to find out more. And the promotoros, we did a lot of training. Promotoros are well trained on the California law, and there are also hotlines. So the state agency cannot give you advice. You don't find out whether the state, you can't ask them in advance, am I qualified? You have to submit when you're ready, and they will tell you. But we have lawyers groups, volunteer lawyers groups, or pro bono lawyers groups, or whatever, who can answer those questions. So here's where you call. The other big success were the WIC centers. Okay, so we went to a WIC center. They had no idea why they should be doing this. Our job is to, this is how they talk. Our job is to help mothers have a stress-free opportunity so that they can produce a lot of milk. We're about producing milk. We're not about paid family and medical leave. Once they understood that 6 weeks of bonding gives you a chance to bond with that child and successfully initiate breastfeeding and make milk in a non-stressful environment, they were all for it. They speak about it at every one of their public meetings in the community, and they advocate it within the state with other WIC centers. So what we discovered is if you're going to do outreach through, and all of these things were done through the nonprofits. Money went to the nonprofits to be able to do this, to be able to fund somebody in the center for a period of time, to fund somebody to do the training. So money went to nonprofits for this, and we now know you have to do this at a location that is big enough that you're reaching enough people, and where it is central to their mission.
We'll go Dana, Tara, Joe, Edwin.
Hi, Dr. Applebaum. My name is Dana Hegood, and I work at USAA. It's a financial services company. I had two questions for you. First off, in all of the analytical work that you did and what you know about the different states, what percentage of employers already have paid leave programs?
We know nationally that it's about 16% of employers. That's 16%, including these public policies. So it's what percent of workers really have access. It's about 16% of workers.
Okay. Awesome, thank you. And you had mentioned earlier that, if I heard you correctly, 2 states, it's fully employee funded. Can you talk more about why did the states do that? What are the things that you think?
California did it back in the 1940s. I can't imagine why they did it, but Connecticut just did it. And I think the reason is that they wanted other things, and I know from having talked to advocates since 2003 about this, that it looks like it's fair if everybody shares it, but as Tara can tell you, and any other economist you talk to, who pays the tax and who the law says pays the tax are not the same thing. So this is not a fight that you would necessarily go to the mat on. So I don't know what the debates were in Connecticut, but I'm sure they extracted a really high payoff for having it completely employee paid. But most of the states have the medical part, which is the most expensive part, partly employer, partly employee paid. I will say in New Jersey, we've been talking about tiered for the replacement. New Jersey has the tiered for the employers. So small employers, not necessarily low wage, pay a smaller percentage of payroll than the bigger employers. So if that's an issue here, you could think about that too.
Tara?
So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about what states have done as far as job protection combined with their eligibility requirements. So specifically, for states that have tried to be very broad-based in their eligibility, do they extend job protection to that broad-based eligibility, or is job protection restricted in some way? Because you might expect for job protection, it may make some sense to have eligibility requirements in terms of size of the employer or length of time with the employer. So for those states that have very broad eligibility, do they have separate eligibility for job protection or extend job protection?
So the family part is job protected in every state that has it. That's because it's rarely taken, it's not a big issue, and generally speaking, you have a valued employee whose mother had a stroke and they need 2 or 3 weeks to get them settled, they're not going to be fired. So it has not been a heavy lift to get job protection in that situation. In the other states, what some of the other states have done is to reduce from 50 to 20 or 30 employees the job protections. Okay, so on the medical part, there are not states that I know of, at least the ones that have had it for a while, where it's 100% of everybody gets it. Everybody covered by the FMLA, so that's all your large employers, already get it, and they've dropped the employee cutoff from 50 down to 30%, or 30 employees or 20 employees, to widen that. But what they also have is non-retaliation or non-discrimination. You have the employee, they took the leave, they've now returned to you as the employer. You cannot retaliate against them for having taken that leave. You might not have held the job for some employees, but when you think about the morale issues involved in having an employee who has everybody knows in these places who really has a serious problem. You have an employee with a serious problem, baby born with a hole in his heart, mother dying, whatever it is, and you fire them because they don't have job protection. And they're going to be out for a couple of weeks. The morale ramifications of that are such that it's not a widespread practice. Can I just say that? It's not a widespread. Big companies already have policies where they don't do it. And small companies know their workers and don't want to do it. So There will be the occasional employer who fires a worker in that situation, but it's not common.
So we'll go Joe, then Edwin.
And I believe Dana got to my question, but could you elaborate a little bit more on the pros and cons of a system that requires both parties, employer and employee, to pay into the system versus we do have several states. I think Washington is 100% employer. You said District of Columbia, I'm sorry.
District of Columbia.
Is 100% employer paid. Right. And then talk a little bit about how independent contractors and gig economy workers have options to be covered.
Sure. So I think really this is a question for every state to decide. It's a question of what seems fair. And the medical is the heavy lift. And so, and it's not for childbirth, it's for you got really sick. Okay, that's the heavy lift. You can't come into work because you are really sick for a couple of weeks. That's the heavy lift on it. In many situations, it seems as if fairness requires that this be a joint responsibility. In DC, it wasn't an option. It was either going to be employer paid or not happen at all. And in that situation, the employers agreed. Okay, so it's going to be employer paid. And in the states where it's, why California did it the way they did it is too long ago. But maybe in Connecticut, they finally heard the message from economists that if you give this up, you should certainly get something very generous in return. But this would not be the issue to go to the mat on. So I don't know what's going to happen here in Colorado, whether the perception of fairness is what's going to matter, or whether, the idea that high-wage workers are going to be protected anyway, as they always are. So, whatever. I think the bigger question is making sure you have a large enough wage base so that the rate is low.
Edwin?
Yes, Edwin So. You mentioned that education/outreach has been a challenge to make sure that especially the low-income workers know about the program. Do you know of any states that implement some kind of onboarding of employees? Have that process placed in during the onboarding of employees in the same way that we have, say, fill out I-9s and W.
Right. We certainly advocate for that, and employers do include this information, but it may be no more than a poster, over the Xerox machine, and it's for a small employer. So there is a requirement that employers inform employees at the time of hire that this is a benefit that they have coming to them.
Okay.
Just like you inform them of what the minimum wage is, if it's relevant.
Is that generally the case with all states?
All states have that. Yeah, if you have, employers are required to inform employees.
Okay.
Nobody hears it on the day. You know what the onboarding is like. You don't remember it or think about it until you're having a baby or your mother is sick or whatever, or you become ill. And if it's a big employer, you can go to the HR department. But if it's a small employer, the employer themselves may not know what the rules are, which is the reason that we need to have the outreach.
Jared?
Great. This is Jared Make from A Better Balance. So two questions. One, returning to Tara's question around job protection, if you could speak to kind of the trends that we're seeing, because the three most recent laws, Massachusetts, Connecticut, and Oregon, don't have an employer size threshold for job protection, and it is both medical and family leave. But the fact that Connecticut and Oregon both have either 90 days or 3 months before you're eligible for job protection, was wondering if you could speak to how that might intersect with the earlier question from Trish on the phone around seasonal workers, because it seems like that's very relevant as we think about workers who maybe are only employed for 3 or 4 months and how that fits in. Because I know
Right.
that, whether it's the Jersey Shore or Cape Cod or, there are seasonal employers in all of these states.
Right, but isn't that just for the job protection?
For just job protection.
Yeah, because the payment of the benefits starts on day one, except in New Jersey, where this was another concession we made to employers, which is, and no other state has this, which is that the first week is unpaid unless you're out for 3 weeks, and then you get the first week retroactively. Okay, but that was because in the early states, everybody was worried who's going to take it. Now that we know that There's just no evidence of abuse of this on any scale, and on any meaningful scale. No other state has a requirement like that. I mean, the two concessions we made to employers were, maybe we made more, but the ones that stand out are the 1 week waiting period. But of course, if you have paid sick days, you can use them in that week. If you have PTO, you can use it in that week. So, you know, and then you'll get the money back at least at the end, because if you're out more than 3 weeks, you get the payment retroactively. What was the question? That was
just, you know, that was one way in terms of how seasonal employers maybe have responded in other states with the job protection time period.
No, you will have to figure that out. And I don't really see that. If it's a seasonal job, I don't see what the job protection does for you very much anyway. But certainly you should get the payment from day one.
Right. And another question, because I don't think it's come up yet, but because I think it's also a movement we're seeing, but other purposes beyond just serious health condition for yourself or family or medical leave, but speaking to domestic violence and
domestic violence is one big one, and the other is military. You have somebody going off to the military or somebody coming back who is seriously disabled or injured because of military service. You have way more generous opportunities, more time in some states, more time that you can take. So some states are beginning to recognize domestic violence, and domestic violence in the paid sick days is pretty widespread because you might have a court hearing that you have to go to. It's not exactly a medical emergency, but you have to show up so that your perpetrator doesn't do whatever they want to do. So, you know, some amount of paying attention to domestic violence and some amount of paying attention to dealing with families with military, people in the military. States are moving in that direction as well.
So I hate to cut the conversation short. We're going to go until 1 o'clock, which is about 15 minutes more than we budgeted. But if everybody can be super sharp with your answers, because I know there are several people who'd like to have them. So we'll have Diana go, then Kathy, then Stacy.
So I apologize if this was already brought up in discussion, but when you talk about taking a day off or 2 days off, you have kind of referred to the PTO. How does intermittent leave work among the different states? And
right, they follow the FMLA on intermittent leave. We all began with the FMLA and then went from there. In general, it's a small proportion of the leaves that are taken. In many cases, for example, chemo, you have to take your mother for chemo because she had cancer. The doctor can tell you what the period of time is and how many, 3 times a week for 6 weeks. Everybody knows what it is. One of the things you have to decide, and you may want to leave it up to businesses to decide, if a worker takes off, do you want them to take just a half a day that they need and then come back? I mean, is that important to your business? Or if they take off, do you need them to take the whole day? So if you think about a hospital, if a nurse takes off, you're going to have to replace them with somebody from the pool, and that person is going to work for the whole day. So if you're a nurse and you're taking your mother for chemo, your employer might say, take the whole day. If you're a law firm and it's a law clerk whose work is piling up, you might say, take the time you need and then come back to work. And we only have a half a day charged against the intermittent leave. So basically, it follows the pattern of the FMLA. It's paid either for half day or whole day, depending on what the leave was. Has to be verified by a doctor. And again, it's not the HR department that has to do it. And I really think that there are 2 things that I think really help with the intermittent leave. One is that a doctor is sending a report to a state agency that has enforcement power and that will come after them for fraud if they are a mill that just turns out, you know, anybody who comes in. So I think it cuts down if that's even a problem. I don't think it's much of a problem anyway, but it cuts down on what people call doctor shopping, because it's one thing to send it to an HR department, it's another thing to send it to the state. And the second thing is that once it's paid, you don't want to go beyond whatever is being paid. So however much hours you have, that will be the maximum that anyone will take, whereas right now, if it's not paid, you might take, I don't know how that would work, you know. But people understand the concept of insurance. That's what we've discovered. And they don't use up every minute of it. They use what they need.
And I don't want to hog your time, but one quick question, which may be a very short answer, and that is, do we have any data that shows any kind of change in how there's been litigation based on these policies, or litigation risk to businesses, or?
There's very little litigation. I'm actually not acquainted with any major cases because it's between the state and the worker, not the employer. The state decides whether you're eligible or not.
But you have mentioned that in some cases where there was some job guarantee issues and so forth, that there was anti-discriminatory.
Right. These things are maybe too new, but I haven't seen any cases about it. I haven't seen any cases. I will say that the one worker who never got the upgrade on the computer did say to the employer, after time went by and they were denied it, do I need to go to the EEOC? And got the upgrade. But I don't know of any cases where actually, if the law says you can't, there's no discrimination, there's no retribution, I think employers understand that.
Final question, Stacy?
So this takes you back to New Jersey. This is Stacy Campbell, and my question is similar to one I asked before, but goes a little bit further. So I know when I talked about, the definition of family, and you said, well, you can establish that at the beginning. But as we look at how do we estimate the number of claims that might come from that, so it's my understanding that New Jersey modified or is modifying the definition of family, making it much broader. Any individual the employee shows to have a close association with the employee.
Not any employee, but only those who choose to have chosen family and not their own family. Okay, in general, it's by blood or marriage. Okay, and you have no control over that. That's the definition in the law. So that's the bulk of your employees, and there will be some small percentage that have been disowned by their family for whatever reason that will go to chosen family.
Okay, so let me ask you just for a clarifying question. So if I have blood family, then I don't have an option in New Jersey to pick other people?
You could.
Okay.
If you could be disowned by your family for any reason, right?
And my family probably wants to disown me. So my question is, how would you go about determining the number of claims that you might get from someone who chooses other people to be their family?
Probably there may be a way to see it. And those that have right now, what are the family leave claims, right? I don't think it will be higher. The fact that you are letting them have chosen family is not going to change that, right? Most people have, whatever it is, 3 or 4 family members, a parent, a sibling, a grandparent that they might have to take care of. So most people have 3 or 4 people that they would have to take care of or who would take care of them. And so that's a thing that this task force can decide. But for chosen family, 3 or 4 seems like a reasonable number. You could say these are the people I may have to take off to take care of and who I would call on. Okay. So, you could set a reasonable number, but...
In your experience, you've seen kind of 3 or 4 people that are
That's
chosen.
Basically who you take off. You take off for your parents if they're both still alive. Yeah. You take off for your own children. And we're talking about the family part of it. Take off if you have a baby, take off for a sibling. In any given year, it's not going to be very many people.
Okay. Thank you.
So 2 things. Dr. Applebaum, would it be okay if other members of the task force come up with additional questions or follow-ups? Can we continue to use you as a resource?
Sure, absolutely.
Thank you very much. And perhaps most important, how about a round of applause?
I probably have told you everything I know, but...
Well, we really appreciate you making the trip and sharing your knowledge with us. I think it gives us a pretty good jump start. Okay, so we contributed an extra 15 minutes to that exercise because I think it was very, very valuable. We're going to make that up in the next part. So if you look at the bill, it requires that you make recommendations on 16 discrete items. So this is page 14 for those of you who are following along in your printout. Those 16 items Is that better? Okay. So those 16 items, though, do have some relationship to each other. And some of them are more important than others. And some of them can't be done before you do this first one. You know, you want to put on your pants before you put your shoes on because it doesn't work very well the other way. Okay? So if you'll go to the next page, Daniel. I want to do a two-part exercise with you. Here's how I see this. First, we'd like to talk about which topics should be discussed in context of each other. And I'll give you an example. If you're talking about the percent of wage replacement, we should probably discuss the overall duration at the same time. You know, do you want both of those at the top of the scale? Do you want some interrelationship between them? There are certain things where that give and take that has been mentioned a few times is likely to benefit from talking about two things simultaneously. Okay? So part one is we're going to ask you to determine which of these topics really should be discussed together. Then part two is we're going to ask you to figure out which topics go first. Which are the most urgent for you to discuss? Right? We got 30 minutes for the exercise. Daniel, next page, please. So, here's what we've done.
I have a question.
Sure.
I don't need to bog down the process, but I feel that I want to put forth a motion. I know that there was I think that's part of the process that you had shared under getting recommendations, but just around the previous decision, around our vote, we procedural vote, and we had agreed upon that would be a 7-vote count, but it doesn't feel like a procedural matter. It feels a lot more important because I think that that vote actually has impact on exactly this, around voting on the different components and the recommendations.
So in this portion, we won't be voting in a way that's decisive. It's simply we're going to determine priority.
But I think, and so I apologize again for interrupting the agenda, but I just feel again, that was not settled for me around that vote, because again, like I said, we took a procedural vote, but it doesn't feel like a procedural. It feels a lot more important. You know, that vote, just around how we move forward with a simple majority or not, can impact the rest of our decision-making in the future. So I don't think it was a procedural vote, honestly. It's more important than that. And so my motion is that I think that we need to, reconsider, we need to revote. And I think, honestly, an example of it is that right now we reached a 7-vote count. We didn't even reach 8, as an example. So I feel that, to demonstrate how important that vote is, my suggestion is that we revote it to 8, that we revote it to get to 8, and see if it moves forward. And if not, we're going to reach that same problem around not reaching 8. And as, Professor Duncan had mentioned, what do we do then, right now, if we can't reach 8? And again, I just feel, again, the legislature process is a simple majority. I'm not sure why we can't be comfortable with that. It's what our legislators do, during the legislative session every single day. So again, I think that just to demonstrate that vote for me is really, really important, and we didn't reach 8. So my motion is to reopen it and for us to revote to 8.
Okay, so there's a motion on the floor to reconsider the vote we took this morning. That would mean that we would use a simple majority rather than the consensus of 8. Is there a second to that motion?
What I said was no. Obviously that is what I would recommend. Okay. So what I'm saying is that to just demonstrate that that there will be a problem to reach 8, that we revote just to reach 8, and then go from there. Or
help me articulate the motion. I'm not.
I hear you. Go ahead. I think what she was saying is that was not an administrative procedural vote. So it should have reached the threshold of 8 to begin with, because it's not just concept. It is a sort of determining of how we will decide issues in the future. And so it was a vote that should have been held to the 8 threshold. And so let's vote it to the 8 threshold. And if we don't meet the 8 threshold,
then we are faced with the problem that Dr. Duncan brought up earlier, which is what do we do at that point? And so I think she's simply saying it was more important than just procedural or administrative, right? About like whether we're going to, set the agenda this way or that way, that is going to be a governing thing for how we do other types of decisions. And so that alone was an important decision enough to warrant a higher threshold that as a body we had agreed or we had voted on holding some decisions to a higher standard.
So do I hear a motion to reopen the discussion on the vote we took this morning?
I think you've got a motion. What you don't have is a second.
Okay.
Jared seconds.
We're into discussion.
Okay, so discussion. Tara?
I guess I'm really confused by the logic of this because what's being advocated for is that we should have a 7-vote threshold instead of an 8-vote threshold to make our decisions. But a decision that was made with a 7-vote threshold is now being rejected and is saying that unless we reach an 8-vote threshold for this decision, we have to revert to a 7-vote threshold. In terms of voting procedure, that's not an internally consistent procedure. An internally consistent procedure to say we have a 7-vote threshold, we pass the motion to raise for certain votes a higher 8-vote threshold, we pass it with a 7-vote threshold. That is internally consistent. But this next piece that we're discussing is not internally consistent. Jared?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's right, and I think that's part of why it's not sitting well with me either. So thank you, Judith, for raising it. I think there is an inconsistency with saying we couldn't even reach 8 on voting on all of these measures to now require 8 votes is inconsistent. So I think it's either if we're going to try to reach a threshold of 8, which, I don't believe based on even that vote is realistic that we're going to be able to, then it should be 8 across the board, or if we want to stay with 7, we should keep 7. I mean, I think from my perspective, that vote we just took, whether it's seen as procedural or however you want to describe it, is the most pivotal vote that this body has and probably will take that will shape the entire outcome of this process in terms of how we reach decisions on these 16 measures. So I do feel like the speed with which we moved through and decided it was a 7 versus an 8 threshold to get it doesn't feel quite right to me. I do think it shapes this entire process pretty significantly.
So I also then want us to think about, so at one point in time, do we vote and there's an outcome and then we come back and say we want to re-vote it? So I think that if we do have procedural things that we want to discuss, we need to get it out on the table before the vote, or we're not going to get anything done. And it just seems like we're really stuck on this subject and we've got a lot of things to talk about. To me, what I like about the 8 is it's going to force compromise, and there's going to have to be compromise. We can talk about what the state does all the time, but when the state got this, they couldn't get it through because they didn't bring people along with them. So to do what they did, I don't know if we're going to be successful either. So I do want clarification of, is there an option to re-vote things?
And in terms of initially, I was thinking for procedural matters that we just have a simple majority. But after hearing what you just said, I come to realize that this real simple procedural vote basically will have a huge ripple effect going forward, like a pebble dropping into the water. It's going to ripple through the entire pond of what's going to happen going forward. And my concern has always been finding a balanced way for both sides to be able to move forward. Just as I'm concerned about the rule of the simple majority, basically dominating the minority, I'm also concerned about the the flip side of that, whereas a minority basically rules the entire agenda by simply standing firm. And based upon what Dr. Duncan has stated, I feel like a simple majority would probably be the best compromise that we can make.
Can I raise to the point of order? So it's my understanding from parliamentary procedure that it takes a 2/3 vote to reconsider a motion. Question, meaning that it comes to a vote.
Okay. So, we have a lot of work to do today as well. So, I'm almost tempted to, thank you. I'm almost tempted to table this to the end of our next exercise so that we make sure that we get through our time, but we are on this here. So I guess the motion would be to call the vote by 2/3 majority, which I think is correct parliamentary procedure. I do agree with that, to reconsider the vote we took earlier this morning. Is that right? Okay.
In this case, would be 9 votes? 8.6. So it should
8.6 for people.
8.6 mathematically.
So 9.
It would need to be 9. And I think that's an important thing from here on out, is we need to declare if something is procedural versus material to the recommendations.
Right.
This, so we need 9 votes in this instance. And Lydia, if you would recap what folks are voting for, and then we'll raise hands.
Okay. So this vote is to reconsider the majority voting mechanism, or to reopen discussion around the voting mechanism.
Point.
Honestly, point of order. Yeah.
So, yeah, point of order. Specifically, if we have already by definition defined there two parts, procedural versus critical issues, then I would certainly say that this is a critical issue. That should not be a procedural. That's based upon a simple majority. For that previous vote to qualify, it has to require 8 votes for it to pass. Because this really is critical to what we're going to do going forward. So it begs the question whether that vote is even correct as a procedural vote rather than a.
Well, I think we've had 3 people say that this procedural matter is a critical matter. We haven't heard that from everyone, so I think we need to vote if
Simple majority or majority on any matter is a procedural issue, or is it a critical issue? I think parliamentary procedures would say it's a process or procedural matter, but I think there's disagreement on that being a procedural matter versus a critical matter. And so I think what you need to do is determine what it is between the body that votes. Because I've heard 3 people say that they think it's not a procedural matter. We need to determine that.
To me, as an analogy, this is basically talking about the Constitution. We're basically voting on the Constitution, the way we're going to work going forward. And that is not just a simple procedure, whether we want a sandwich or salad for lunch.
Tara.
So the thing that makes this particular vote different, right, is that you're setting the vote threshold, right? So again, suppose that we were to go back, right, and revote this, right, and fail, right, we would revert to a 7-vote decision margin, right, for anything. If we do that, then that means 7 votes, right, could change the vote threshold back up to 8, right? So that's why I say this is not internally consistent. If the people who want this vote that we previously passed to be put up again and fail want a 7-vote threshold. But then once you do that, any 7 votes can move the vote threshold back to 8. It's not internally consistent, right? It doesn't make sense for people who want a 7-vote threshold to say, but no, you have to have 8 votes to change the vote threshold. It just doesn't work.
So So one of the reasons that parliamentary procedure exists is because people make a discrete point and others signal their support or dissension from that discrete point. I feel like we're pretty muddy right now. Okay? So I'd like to hear someone make a motion with the discussion that's been going on, a fresh motion such that Lydia can direct a vote on it. Is that fair? Because I really feel like there's a lot going on.
I think we have that, and so it's your motion, right? You made the motion, you seconded it, Jared, right?
The motion is the motion to reopen the vote on the previous one. Is that the motion?
That's what I had initially proposed.
Okay.
It means we have to agree to re-vote, right? Parliamentary. We actually have to first vote whether or not.
We're voting whether or not we're going to reconsider that, and then it would go, if that would prevail, then it goes to your
And honestly, I think that my concern is around, like, I think really the core of my concern is around that this doesn't seem like a procedural vote to me. It feels a lot more important. It's going to carry, like as mentioned before, it's going to carry weight to, like, the rest of the process. So I feel like it's not light. It's pretty heavy. And so I can set another motion around, like, for us to reopen the conversation and decide if it's a procedural critical point. I can set that motion as well to clarify that, because that really is where my concern lies.
I think that helps.
Sure. So will you make that motion?
Right. So I put the motion to vote and have a discussion on if this is a procedural critical vote, or critical vote.
And how many votes are needed to validate that?
So, okay, I just want to make sure that I'm clear. What you're asking, the vote that we've had discussion on and that we took, you want to reconsider that. You want us to go back and reconsider that. Is that correct? Okay. So that, to me, is a motion to reconsider, and I believe that that is a two-thirds majority vote, or two-thirds vote.
Kevin, then Kathy?
The point is that Edwards made a judgment is that we made an error in that vote. That vote was wrong. It was a critical issue, not procedural. We go for the 8 threshold. That affects everything. That's what she's saying. That vote was made an error. We don't need 2/3 majority to go back and revisit that issue. We need to fix the error. This whole thing, I mean, we are always going to struggle with, is it critical or procedural? I don't know what that means.
Well, that's actually the root of the confusion.
Right.
We don't have a definition of that.
Yeah.
I would say the procedure by which we vote, to me, seems procedural. But I don't have a vote in this process. Kathy?
So, Tara's point, should the motion really just be raising the vote threshold again and setting it at 7? Do you see what I'm saying? Or a simple majority? Because if it's procedural, then we only need 7 to do that. So if you were to offer a new motion to amend that vote, or to offer a substitute motion for the motion that somebody offered for the 8 hours ago, then we could vote on that, and it would take 7 votes to change it back to 7.
That's
going
correct.
forward, right?
That is correct.
Okay.
So we just need someone to motion that.
So I motion that we change the decision to be 7 to carry
For all matters.
for all matters.
All matters would have
So we don't have
majority to
to,
pass.
we don't have to try to figure out what is important, what's not important. Everything's the same. Do I hear a second?
Okay. So there's a motion on the floor to do a new vote that says all matters would be carried by a simple majority.
Correct.
So I'm gonna raise the point of parliamentary procedure because I think it's wrong. And I think that we need to figure out, we voted, we had a time to discuss it, and we've made our decisions. I mean, nobody rushed into that decision, But I think that if this is going to be reconsidered, I think we ought to go back through the process and do it the right way, so that when everybody's looking at what we're doing, we just make sure that we're following the proper procedures. And I don't think just making another motion is going to do that. I think you've got to go back, reconsider the motion that was made. If that passes, then we go to what motion that Judith wants to bring forward.
Jared?
Yeah, so, I mean, I do want to respectfully disagree that it wasn't rushed. I think first, where we left things at the end of the last meeting was we couldn't reach this decision. We were unable to, and that we were going to wait until our first critical decision to decide, which to me I thought was more down the road. It wasn't on the agenda that was provided ahead of time, saying that we were taking this vote. The very last question, which I raised before we took the vote, was, I don't even know, do we need 7 or 8? Someone said 7, we voted it was done. This was rushed. This is very unclear. I'm also not an expert in parliamentary procedure, and I think to be a successful member of this task force, if we're adopting a parliamentary procedure, somebody needs to outline what that entails, because I'm not familiar with this. So I do think that there was an error. I think it was rushed. And I think it was an error and rushed in something that will, again, be more pivotal to the outcome of this entire process than any other decision that we'll make.
Tara?
Do we have a second for Edwin's proposal? I was gonna second it.
Okay.
You know.
We have 2 seconds for Edwin's proposal. Okay. Any discussion?
I just want to make sure we're clear on what we're voting on before people actually vote.
Yeah.
Okay, that's all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And then the voting threshold will be 7 or 8?
7.
So the voting threshold would be 7, and we're voting on whether, can you make your motion again, Edwin? I don't want to mess it up.
Yes,
for you.
I motion that all decisions made by this body be a majority, simple majority.
Okay. Okay. That all decisions be a simple majority
7 votes.
of 7 votes. Okay. All in favor? Oh, we have one more
sorry.
discussion, go please.
Does this have to meet 2/3, 9, or 7 on this vote?
So we're already way out of parliamentary procedure
Okay, all
for right
I just
now,
wanted to make sure.
and it's
Coming
1:30. So,
The goal is for the group to be together.
right,
7 votes.
okay. Okay, are we ready to vote? Great. So the motion is, and we're gonna vote on this. Finally, last vote on this, hopefully. That decisions made by this body reach a 7 majority threshold. All in favor?
Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Go to the phone. Trish, are you for or against?
Against.
Okay. So we've got 6 votes.
Okay. So this is the part where we would continue discussing under the, what we had talked about, since this would be the motion fails.
So,
Okay.
okay, just so we know how divided this body is, I would like to motion that all decisions be made, require 8-vote majority.
That's also a 7 vote.
What's that?
Yeah, but that is a 7 vote.
And then what?
It's procedural.
What are you asking for? I would like to put forth another motion that all decisions made by this body requires 8-vote majority. Okay. Before, the last one was 7, and that failed, so I'd like to put forth another.
So, but we already have something that passed earlier today that said 8 for.
So what I would like to be able to see is what does that look like now, for the record, after we have gone through this process.
Sure.
Can I make a motion to table further discussion on this, and despite the fact that there's some disagreement about whether it's a procedural or critical matter, I do think we should document minority opinion because it's very strong. That's my motion.
Second.
Okay. So the motion's been made to table this discussion and to work on this in the interim. to table this for now, and then, as noted, we would document any minority opinions as well. Okay, there's a second on that motion.
We're able to say something?
Yes.
Yeah, so I still want to repeat that that motion failed, but I still think we made an error based on our own information that we had set out between this hazy procedural or critical decision in reaching that past one with a vote threshold of 7 versus 8 by the own earlier rules that we had set out and discussed, or at least my own understanding of them.
I agree with that. I do feel it was an error, and that's where my concern comes from.
Yeah.
I disagree, because if you look at who voted for the two ones, the original vote and this vote, all the votes were completely consistent. There were 7 people who both agreed to raising the vote threshold to 8 for the actual recommendations, and the same 7 people voted to not reopen, to not change the vote threshold back down to 7. So I think actually it was actually made with good information because the votes were inconsistent across the 2 votes.
Okay. So we're going to vote. Okay.
Table.
We're going to vote to table. Okay. So.
Procedural.
Yes.
Okay. What?
The vote that you're about to table
Yes.
qualifies as procedural. I'd just like to see a head nod.
Yes. Yes.
Can I ask a question? What does it mean by work on it in the interim? Who is that, and what does that mean?
So I think part of the discussion that we would plan to have for this afternoon was to see whether or not we needed to work in between meeting times as well. So, or as a body. Okay. So we may or may not, this may or may not come up with that. That's going to be part of the progress management. But right now, the motion is to, the vote is to table this discussion, and this is a procedural vote. So 7. Okay.
Table discussion and continue working on it?
I might volunteer.
Please.
Anybody would like to volunteer? We can work up a list of issues that are procedural, topics that are procedural, and issues that are critical.
Okay. Great.
Recap that.
Okay. So there may be some work in the interim to discuss which things are procedural and which things are critical for us to make our recommendations on. Okay. So we're going to the motion right now is to table this discussion. All those in favor?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And Trish, just for the record?
Yes.
Okay. All right, that's 9 votes.
Okay. So we're going to move on with our agenda. And Greg?
Okay, thanks.
All righty, so we're going to get you out of your seats in just 1 second here. Here's the idea. We've got a 2-part exercise. What I'd like to do is get you all to agree on which topics we should discuss in concert with each other. And then part 2, I'd like you to declare the priority for discussion in the next meeting. Okay? So we have gone ahead and with the help of Stacy and Lydia, laid out what we think are some topics that belong together. And it's not absolutely so. It's simply a recommendation. We're going to propose something, and then you all can debate it. So immediately behind this screen, you're going to see this exact diagram in Post-it notes. And I'm going to ask you to move them around. If you think there are certain things that should be discussed in concert with each other that's different than what this is, we'll just reorganize them. That's part 1 of the exercise. Next page, please. Part 2 is that we're going to ask you to multi-vote. In front of you, and Lydia, may I borrow yours? In front of you, each of you should have a little strip of these 6 voting dots. We're going to ask you to lay them across the categories that you determine in part 1 of the exercise. Daniel, hit a button. Laying the dots onto the categories helps us see visually what you believe to be the highest priority. And then part of our job is to craft exercises that allow us to discuss which topics you want to discuss together in the priority order that you declare. Fair enough on what we're trying to do? Okay, so I'm going to ask you to do a couple of things. First, please pick up your voting dots. Second, come on up to the board. Okay? Everybody should be moving my way, holding a small strip of these. All right. Yeah, there are yours. Perfect, thank you. No, shouldn't have dots. Okay, only the task force members have dots. Okay. Ramona should have some dots. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't realize that. Okay, then no. Here we go, guys. So we've got up here the diagram that I showed you on the slide. What I'd like to do is reorganize these yellow stickies as part one of the exercise. In other words, if you think program funding structure should absolutely be discussed in concert with job protection, you would put that up there. Okay? That's as simple as part one is intended to be. Okay? Then part two, we're going to place our priorities. So let's do part one first. Have a look at this and say, logically, are these the groups? If we're going to talk about purpose and eligibility, do we want to have these four in play at the same time? That's the question for you all. Or is there some other grouping of them that makes more sense to you? Tara?
The first thought I have is when I'm discussing the eligibility piece, I need to know whether that eligibility is just for paid benefits or if that eligibility also includes protection. So at least an initial decision needs to be made on eligibility about whether the eligibility that's discussed includes job protection and paid leave or just paid leave.
Okay. At very least, it's going to include paid leave. And the question is, do we want to be discussing job protection in concert with that? What do you all think? Sandra says logically, nope, that doesn't make sense to her.
This is under protection already, and that's what it should be discussed with. Oh, because it's under payment duration and protection, and I think that's where it should stay.
Now, for the record, I created this construct. So this is only mine logically. It doesn't belong to you. You can adopt it. But again, you can just as easily change it. Okay? So that was, my goal was just to move the conversation forward.
Can I clarify why I made my comment? Yes. So the FMLA, right, has eligibility restrictions for job protection that have to do with the size of the employer and how long you've worked for the employer, because the idea is that job protection might be more costly for small employers or if a worker has just arrived very recently, right? So under eligibility, if you're going to be extending job protection to anyone who's eligible, then you need to think about those sorts of issues. If you're only talking about, at that point, eligibility for the paid leave, and then going to be potentially deciding a different type of eligibility for job protection later, that's fine, but at least that needs to be thought about when you're first discussing eligibility.
So logically, would you say, this is eligibility to take leave, this is eligibility for job protection? Is that a different way to say it?
So I think I hear what you're saying, and I would say move job protection under eligibility and keep those two together. I think they are separate issues, but I do think for purposes of this program, that's what folks had envisioned.
That would be fine, yes.
For me, eligibility to take leave is not about if you have job protection or not. It's about the circumstances, like paid family for maternity, if it's for a serious health condition. So I do not the purpose of leave. So yes, so eligibility. I think that's just a different component. I think it's around as well, like the previous how Aileen Applebaum was saying, like the look back around the hours and things like that. So I think that it's different because that's really just to even access the program, and it's not talking about really if your job's protected or not. It's just accessing the program.
I do agree with that point, and specifically I feel like almost eligibility should be part of payment duration, and protection should be under purpose and protection, because part of the purpose is we want to, we want to be able to provide these things. So if it's paid leave, that's part of the purpose that we're here for, and also job protection is also another purpose that we want to provide for. So if anything, take eligibility over and cross out job protection, because job protection should be a part of the purpose that we're here for.
This all, it's hard to separate any of this because it all works together as one program, but I think it might be clearer if it's eligibility to take the benefit, because all 9 of the paid family and medical leave insurance laws have separate eligibility for the benefit from the eligibility for job protection. Of course, you're going to want to talk about them together because that's how these programs work, but some of the confusion might be eligibility to take leave. There are, again, we could decide something different, but all 9 state and DC examples have different eligibility for benefit from job protection, which some people refer to as the leave.
Okay. So I want to be completely clear. In order to fit it on my page, I left out certain words, and I think these are important. So part 1, purpose of the leave, is actually, I think, the circumstances. Purpose of the leave, including serious illnesses, caring for a loved one with a serious illness, bonding with a new child, needs arising from military deployment and the effects of domestic violence, stalking, and sexual assault. Okay? So when we use the word circumstances, I think that's here. So let's move that word over. Okay. And then, did somebody have a specific, an additional or a rearrangement they would propose? And by the way, these things move very, very easily, so we can look at a few different ways, okay? Somebody want to relocate one of these?
I'm sorry, your name is Jane?
Gary. Gary, sorry.
I'm sorry. I agree with him. I think I'm okay with job protection in a separate grouping because that is different than eligibility to the program. I very much agree with all things. We're going to have to keep the whole scope of the program in mind as we're thinking about it. But I actually like the way that you've got it broke out.
Okay. So a vote for that. And by the way, we can create an additional category and discuss things separately. So, Kathy?
I was just going to say that I think portability of benefits should go up under purpose and eligibility.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, and I don't want to really reduce this one to a vote. I'm just looking for people to agree. Yeah? Okay. Because again, some of these things are likely to, the ground for compromise is when you consider them in concert with each other.
That's really important to me is in terms of coming from a little bit more physical conservative side is to make sure that there is good enforcement against fraud.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's because, I remember invariably during every election cycle, they card out the woman that was eating lobster on food stamps, and it really does inflame a lot of people when they feel like, government programs do not have sufficient enforcement to protect us against fraud. So I would think program management would need to address that very strongly.
Okay. Would that be under sustainability of the program? It's not called out. Enforcement is not called out specifically. That word doesn't appear in these 16 items, but under implementation?
Yeah, that's under implementation.
Okay, I'm just going to add the word enforcement. Okay, thanks, Edwin.
I would recommend, following up on the earlier discussion about job protection, is that if job protection, right, is going to have separate eligibility, right, from the paid leave, then I think it should then be separated from the discussion of duration, wage replacement, and maximum, because those 3 pieces are about sort of the cost of the paid benefit and the generosity of the paid benefit. Job protection is a separate piece that does not affect the total financial cost of the program and may potentially have separate eligibility requirements. So it should not be discussed in concert with those other 3.
And the implication of that would be to move job protection out under its own header. Okay? I'm just looking to assess. People feel like that is reasonable. And again, this is just for purposes of discussion. We're going to craft exercises and allocate time for discussion. That's really what this will help us do.
I'm going to raise a point here. I agree that self-employed workers belongs under purpose and eligibility. At the same time, in a minute, we're going to discuss how to rank these in terms of priority order, and of course, purpose and eligibility is going to be high up because we're worried about the things we need to give to the actuarial service to actually calculate the things we need them to calculate. And the problem is that why self-employed workers are important, they're not going to be crucial to decide right away to go to the actuarial. So if we're thinking about, if we had unlimited time before we went to the actuarial, then of course self-employed workers would go under purpose and eligibility. But the question is whether we need to decide those before we decide the items like duration, wage replacement, core eligibility, or whether we want to put that down a little lower so we get to the sort of the big ticket items first.
Kathy?
I was just going to say that I think that self-employed workers is kind of a proxy for a whole bunch of workers, seasonal, part-time, non-traditional, non-standard, a whole variety of things of how we're going to cover those. So that is, I mean, while they alone maybe are, self-employed people are not themselves are maybe not a huge part of this universe of people who are covered, they do kind of stand in for 1099 workers and a whole variety of other kind of work arrangements, and that is a really important part, and it will speak to things like portability and funding. How do we allow those people to buy in? How long can they stay in? And so I think that as our economy kind of changes and we have not a huge growth in non-standard work, but growth in non-standard work arrangements, that while they're not important maybe alone, they are as a whole.
Okay. So
important to leave.
My lesson learned so far is the importance of definitions. Are you all okay, and I'm just going to look for head nods, to say that in this case, self-employed workers includes 1099, gig economy, people who are non-traditional? Yeah? So looking for purposes of discussion. Okay. Okay. Then the second question is, do you like the idea of discussing those in concert with purpose and eligibility, or is it its own? Do you want to discuss that separately? Because I think I heard Tara make the argument that it's less urgent in terms of the actuary, the impact on the actuary. Is that what I understood?
Compared to duration, wage replacement choices.
Okay.
I think I would keep them where they are right now in terms of, we want to make sure that we have the discussion we need to have around this eligibility for everyone.
Okay. So Lydia, your point would be leave it where it is because they're just part of the pool. And it is an item on here. It's number 2, self-employed workers access to paid family and medical leave and a mechanism to allow self-employed workers to participate is the full definition of that. So I think the purpose is relatively clear on that one. Okay. Any other suggestions for rearrangement, Diana?
Can I assume that duration includes intermittent leave in that discussion?
Okay, so definitionally, do we believe that duration would define the intermittent component? Yeah? Okay. Okay. Other thoughts on rearranging the groupings?
So I have a question. The way you have the heading is, do you already have them in the priority that you think they should be, or are we?
No, ma'am. I was just looking for some kind of logical grouping. So those categories don't exist in the legislation, but a list of 16 was really difficult for, I think, any human brain to process. So I was trying to get them into some kind of logical category.
Okay, so we're to decide. That's the priority. Okay.
You are, yep.
Could you help me understand the difference between solvency of the fund and sustainability of the program and how you discuss those? Yeah,
so the question is, can you help understand the difference between solvency and sustainability? all I can tell you is what the legislation says. Okay? Now, there may be others who participated in further discussions and would like to define those words more carefully. So when I look at sustainability of the program, item 14, it says the sustainability of a paid family and medical leave program. Part 12 is the solvency of a paid family medical leave fund under various models. Jeff?
So there is one buried within the legislation. There's a question about continuity, and if we had a third-party vendor that was operating the program and there was a problem with that third-party vendor, what might continuity look like? So that might be what they were alluding to with regards to sustainability. That's speculation a little bit on my part, but that I too am working off the language in the legislation.
Yeah, it makes sense though, because it says solvency of the fund under different models, under various models is actually how it reads exactly. So that logically would make sense. Is that helpful, Diana?
So is this, again, this is on here, like if I'm going to increase the take rate that we need from employers and employees, that's why it's under program management?
So I viewed that more as, the reason that I laid it down there logically was because it was so far down the list, and it was in concert with things like role of third-party vendor, sustainability. I would have thought that might have something to do with things like enforcement, rate adjustment, things that you would do over time to ensure that the fund was administered responsibly. But again, that's my interpretation of a relatively few words here.
It would simplify things, put combined funding, solvency, and program management, put everything in the program. The solvency of the program, that's what it means.
No, I don't think that's the spirit of legislation.
I don't, that didn't look like that one met with a lot of love immediately.
I'm wondering if how the program would interact with other benefits needs to be moved up to funding and solvency, because how the program interacts with other benefits is going to determine some things about the cost and solvency of the program, whereas those other three things under program management are next tier down things, like timeline and implementation.
What do y'all think about that?
And remember, Dr. Applebaum called it benefit coordination.
Benefit coordination, yep. Okay, I'm just going to add those terms, and I'll make the note, Dr. A.
Once you establish that stuff,
On that sustainability of the program, I think that should move under funding and solvency, because it really, when I think about that, I think about, so as Dr. Applebaum talked about projections and building a reserve and, right, so like adjusting the premium within a base, like some of these budgetary processes that you can use to manage and control the fund over time, that seems like a sustainability thing, and that all has to do with funding and solvency to me.
Show of nods.
But so is that under, I agree with your issues, but I thought those were under funding structure. Everything you said, I would have put under funding structure.
I was thinking funding structure is more like, is it employee paid? Is it right?
Yeah, but if the rate can be adjusted, if the rate is internally adjusted, I would put that under funding structure. But
I would agree with.
You like Kathy's proposal to move this?
Yeah.
And I think if we move them over, the legislature is actually asking for you all to give them some recommendations of how this should work, right? So we need to address all of these, whether we address them independently or whether we had a little bit in column A and column B. So the suggestion would be move sustainability over here, and between these two, and I'm going to go to a whiteboard marker so I don't wreck Joe's new room. Kathy, the things that you mentioned were things like rate adjustment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Reserve ratio.
Reserve ratio.
How they do, whether they do a structure, whether they do, and how they do sort of an actuarial assessment at the beginning of the year. So do they look at claims paid? Are they looking at, what are the factors that they're looking at to project claims so that they're sure, that they know that they're building an adequate reserve? that they're ramping up for increased utilization, if they are rolling out a great outreach program through WIC centers and clinics, then are they anticipating, based on that they're going to see an increase in utilization, and of what? So, like, those are all kinds of things to manage the fund over time. Like the UI division and Jeff here, or workers' comp has that where they have certain reserve ratios, and they
Got it.
right. So over time, like managing that fund based on different things, how they're going to do that to make it sustainable over the long haul.
Got it. So the things for everybody listening at home, rate adjustment. So if we look at solvency and sustainability and don't try to necessarily be exclusive, but instead be inclusive, it would be things like use of different models, rate adjustment, reserve ratios, factors used to improve projections, et cetera. Does that seem like things you'd want to talk about together? Okay. Seeing some head nods there. Any other adjustments in categories where we strip them out from one category and put it into another? Tara?
On my earlier thing, I was actually trying to get interaction with other benefits moved to the other category, not, I don't know if that was an agreement or not. I just wanted to clarify what I was suggesting.
What do you guys think about that? Would you want to discuss how the program interacts with other benefits in concert with funding structure, solvency, and sustainability? No?
If you go back to you adding the word coordination to it, if that's part of the agreement with it, I think it is, that is, to me, that's by definition program management. Yeah. If you're talking about not coordination, but just how it works with other stuff.
My question is, are you talking about coordination with public benefits or private benefits? Because I think if we're talking about how it coordinates with private benefits, a piece of program management or even some of the other categories, but I think if we're talking about funding and solvency, maybe we're talking about how it interacts with other public benefits, but I think they're... well, even job protection is, when we're talking about FMLA, that's an interaction with unpaid leave benefit for some, but all of them are related, to Jared's point earlier.
It's not a coordinated, that's not a coordinated public benefit. So when I think of, I'm just asking for clarification because I'm trying to understand. So when I think of public benefits, I think of like TANF, WIC, other things like that. So are we worried about?
I would like to know how the lack of paid family leave might contribute to take up in those programs, but I'm not sure if that's something we're going to talk about or not.
Yeah, I mean, I guess none of the laws or drafts here have ever addressed any of those other programs. I mean, there's research out there. I mean, it's something we could discuss. I see it as a little separate from the mechanics of how do you top off your time with vacation or sick leave or PTO banks, workers' comp.
I don't think it's really.
Yeah.
Edwin and Kathy?
And also, I think at this point, I like to see the process keep moving forward, whether it's program management and solvency. It's close enough that I think it does not exclude us from having that conversation going forward, but it'll help us too.
Oh, thanks. I was thinking that the interaction with other benefits, just questions that came up through the legislative session, to Hadley's point, were really about how does it coordinate with other benefits that, like unemployment insurance or workers' compensation insurance, where you're actually absent from work and receiving some sort of wage replacement. So employers had a lot of concern about, well, can you get UI and this benefit at the same time? So that coordination of benefits of other things at the department. Right.
In there too.
Well, those were private, and so we really were thinking more about, because private employers are going to handle those things differently from the way the state would handle, and employers are rated differently on their unemployment insurance claims, so I think there was just a lot of concern that they didn't want people double dipping or triple dipping or whatever the case may be. So it was really mostly about how it was going to work with notification of other, like the purpose of leave and that kind of stuff with other programs that the department oversees.
So to clarify my thing, so, these titles are things we've just made up. But what I'm looking at here is that I see us kind of probably going towards first priority category, second priority category, third priority category, fourth priority category, and I'm thinking that coordination with other
government benefits is something that belongs in third priority rather than fourth priority category, because that's the reason I'm thinking about moving it, not about the titles of funding and program management.
Just a quick show of hands. Who's in favor of moving it? I want to move us along because we need to get to public comment. Who's in favor of moving that over for consideration with funding insolvency? Just quick show of hands. All right. One hand. Alrighty. Diana, did you have a...
Well, I just had a question. When you were talking about public benefits, are we discussing the coordination of benefits for public employees and their coordination of benefits and how this fits in there, or is that a separate topic? Right.
With someone, qualifies for unemployment insurance or workman's comp.
Okay.
And then
So where do we discuss how this impacts public employees?
I think we can discuss all of them. We're just setting priorities in terms of how we're going to coordinate.
Yeah. Let's go to Trish Sullivan on the phone. Trish?
Hi. Yes, I might have lost this in the conversation, but I would like to see coordination of other benefits by private employers included, because I do know a lot of employers do offer paid parental leave, and it would be good to see how this coordinates with the program.
Thanks, Trish.
Should we even consider moving benefit coordination up to one of the other? I do agree it's very important. And I don't know that it's necessarily in that program management.
So right now, my understanding is we're just figuring out which we can chunk together for the topic of the conversation.
Right. Yep.
And then with the dots, we're going to figure out which one to take on first. Is that right?
Yes. I understand where Tara's going, though. She's predicting the game and concerned that we wouldn't be talking about this, and it's a critical idea. Tell you what, and by the way, this is, for all of the discussion earlier around voting, this is really just intended to take your temperature and make sure that we're not spending a bunch of time talking on the role of third-party vendors when really it's about the duration versus the wage replacement, et cetera. So let's move on to the second part, and then we'll jump to quick discussion of the next meeting and public comment. You all have your dots? So, because these big categories are orange, please hang them off to the side of the big categories, okay? And then we're going to arrange questions between this meeting and next. I will happily solicit specific points that you'd like to have discussed in each of those categories so that we have a very fulfilling discussion next time. Hadley?
Question. We can put our orange dot close to the orange post-its and the yellow post-its, depending on...
Just the orange. Yeah.
Is job protection still in this category, or we have 4 or 5 categories?
We have 5 categories now. Job protection is its own
Big orange.
Big orange. Thank you. Okay. Clear enough? You could put all 6 onto one. Generally speaking, what we say is try to distribute them across the categories. We really just want to get a visual take on it. Clear enough? The order in which you want these things to be discussed is really that priority. Using all 6 of your dots. Ready? If you got a question, just see me. Go ahead.
I guess I care about her.
Yep. We just share my board.
See, I'm doing this.
I'm comfortable with any order. Yeah. Great.
Alrighty, so here's the upshot. Purpose and eligibility, funding and solvency, payment duration and protection. We now have some related categories, or excuse me, some related items that we can discuss together, and we see that these three are relatively important and appear urgent. Program management seems like something that would lag. I did register what you all said about benefit coordination, both between other public benefits and private. So we won't miss any of these. We won't not get to any of them. We just need to make sure that we do it in an appropriate order. So I'll send a diagram of this out to you all later with the additional text on it. Okay. And between this meeting and next, we'll go ahead and craft exercises that allow us to discuss these items in concert with each other. Remember that our September-October meetings are closer to full day meetings, so we have time to pursue these. Okay. You want to pull up the, yeah, actually we're going to kill it. So we only had one person who had volunteered for public comment, and Louise chose instead just to write a note. She said, due to time limitations, I'll forgo speaking. If task force members follow up with Dr. Applebaum, I respectfully request additional information regarding the observed financial impacts for employers, especially small businesses that do and do not already offer paid leave benefits when paid leave insurance programs went into effect in their areas. Thank you. I also request that additional information on this and other follow-up with Dr. Applebaum is shared publicly on the task force website. Okay, so that's Louise Meerland, I believe it's pronounced. That was her public comment. It was the only one. Take us to the next page, please. Oops, sorry. Next. Here we are. So our September meeting is planned for the 26th. It's from 11 a.m. to 5 p.m., again, most of the day. Some topics that I know we're going to talk about: progress on contracting activities, discussion of public comments received. So this is the massive public comment exercise that Jeff and Admira spoke about earlier. We are due the CDPHE findings on the health impacts of paid family and medical leave. It's actually technically due the very next day, so we're going to push to make sure that gets to you in time for discussion on that. And we can have a presentation if it is warranted. And then discussion on topics deemed highest priority by the task force. So I'll work with Lydia and Stacy to craft an agenda, and expect that I'll be reaching out to you all with specific to solicit specific questions for discussion in each of those categories so that we can guide the discussion around the things that are most important for you in terms of getting to consensus. Fair? Right. If you feel strongly about adding other items to the agenda, talk to Lydia and Stacy, and I'll work through them. Okay, so as chair and vice chair, please petition them. Next page. And then I'll pause for any last-minute comments. So we're going to publish the meeting minutes. If any of you see something that isn't accurate, just send it to Daniel. He'll coordinate. Those members of the public and those of you here who are connected to larger constituencies, please encourage people to submit public comments via the website, Colorado Register, et cetera. Task force members continue posting those documents. I think there are about 20 out there, but if I look at who sent them, it's really only 2 folks until Jared told me he's going to put one up there. So do review those. There's some richness out there. And then we'll develop a detailed agenda focused around the highest priority topics. And if there are other smaller topics that we can fit in, so we can sort of sift them into smaller buckets of time, we'll do that. Kathy?
I just had a quick question of clarification. So, and I'm sorry we went round and round about this a couple of times, but the comments that are submitted on the form, on the website, those are not the comments that we will consider as a body as we are deliberating the next steps, or they are?
We will, yes.
Okay, so they have the same weight as the mail and email.
I think what weight you guys choose to give them is up to you, but wherever we receive a public comment from, we'll make sure to provide it so that you can take a look at them.
Okay.
And can I just add to that?
Yeah.
So, yeah, so we wanted to provide a number of avenues by which people could submit comments, and we don't discriminate any weight between those avenues. And we're planning on doing 2 things. One is provide you the raw data, and also a summarized version of that data.
Regardless of the source.
Regardless of the source.
No, I just wanted to mention that I went on to the CDO task force in the form, and I just noticed it doesn't require like a name or email. And I would say that I would think that's important because, as we know, social media and with anonymity online, I think it's really, really important to include minimally a name for the public comments on the website, just to make sure that there's integrity in the comments.
Can I address that?
Okay.
Sure.
Lydia, you got one.
Oh, I do.
You are. So thank you for that. I had brought that up earlier this week, and I think we've decided to add that to the Google form, but it would not be a required question. You know how you can make it required? But we would add that part onto the form. Jeff?
So I'm not sure we quite came to the same conclusion, but let me add some context. First, this was part of a discussion that was had with the task force, and it was decided in a telephone meeting that the only demographic information we were going to capture was whether they were an employer or an employee, generally speaking, if they identify as one of those, and what city they were coming from. We thought that might be interesting information to capture. At that time, the task force did not bring up any concerns about collecting any other demographic information. And then the point to be considered, so we are capable of doing whatever needs to be done in terms of adding demographic information, including name. However, the point of consideration that we think is important is that the comments are part of public record. And we felt as though we had mixed feelings about prompting people to provide their name and their full name or part of their name. If it is, in fact, going to be part of public record, we could do that if there was a disclaimer and if also there was it was a non-mandatory field. So we feel fairly strongly that it shouldn't be a mandatory field, and there would need to be a disclaimer that it's part of public record. So if you'll take that into consideration, we can do it however the task force sees fit.
Thank you. And I will clarify that I had a misperception that that the Colorado Register was similar to the Federal Register, where most people did provide at least that information to that. And then the way it was set up to collect comment through the form and direct people to the website. So just with my aging researcher hat on at this point, I do think that it is helpful to at least collect that minimal data, and I'm happy with that being anonymous, but I do feel like at least asking for a name and perhaps at least that much is good, so that we know if we need to follow up with folks and that sort of thing. So, I don't know.
I guess, so one question on that. Could we have a name, but also make it clear you don't have your full name? And is there a way that, or is there a precedent with CDLE collecting emails, but not making those emails public? So I do think the concern is, what is there to stop one person with extremely strong views, regardless, from putting in, 60 comments themselves? So I do think if we're not requiring some basic information or something that shows that these are coming from actual different people or companies or bodies, then, at least I will weigh the anonymous ones quite differently. But I think that's the real concern. So I wonder if there's some way in the middle to try to protect people's confidentiality if it's a concern, while still making sure it's not, just somebody putting in a ton.
Forgive this very tech ignorant question, but does Google Forms keep track of the ISP addresses or which computers they're coming from? No? Okay. All right. Because I share Jared's concern.
Okay.
I would
Judith?
suggest that, that the information is collected, but it's not publicized. Because I think that for me is just more around if the task force can have access to that name and it's not necessarily shared, if there's issues about
if there's issues about confidentiality, like a name being shared on a website, then I think that Google Forms, maybe you can create it where you have the name and email that is required. You just don't share that information on the website. That's not visible information. But then that would assure that we're getting, individual comments and not from one person.
Forgive my ignorance, but is that something that the AG, because if it's a a matter of public record, is that required? Is that already an established opinion, or is that?
Yeah. Not my area of expertise, and I don't know off the top of my head, but I think that's part of our concern, is that if it's information that's provided, it needs to be fully disclosed. So that is our basic understanding of the rules that govern this. We can dig a little deeper to find out what a happy medium might be. We certainly understand the concept of crashing the ballot box, if you will, and respect that. But so give us some time to do some research on this to find a happy medium that will address that issue, perhaps, but also live within the spirit of what we're trying to do without divulging people's information unnecessarily. Okay.
Thanks. Any other last minute comments? Jared?
Yeah, just a question. Sorry to make you run back and forth. So I didn't see on the next steps, and I'm just curious what the thinking is on the 3 expert reports, because the timeline that you showed earlier, Jeff, I had September 9th. So that's quite a bit before. So is the thought that we'll receive them soon after, and we're supposed to be reviewing them in advance of October? If we're just talking about next step, I'm just curious kind of where that fits in with the next 2 meetings.
I'll come to you. Yeah, thank you. So what's not up on the timeline is that which you mentioned. And yes, our intention is to get those reports in, provide them in advance of the task force meeting so that you have time to review that. CDLE will also be done with its analysis on third-party administration versus state administration, and same concept. We'll get that as far in advance of the task force meeting as possible to give you an opportunity to review that.
Great.
So both of those items will be added.
This is Diana. So the way I understand it, the public comment document is live now.
Yes.
What is the timeline for resolving this issue about identifying whoever submits a comment?
24 hours.
24 hours. Okay, and I do want to register, I understand everyone's concerns, but I do have concerns that we will be suppressing information volunteered by small businesses. I really believe that if we require that they identify themselves.
Thanks. Any other comments? All right.
She's fine.
Okay. All right, then Lydia,
Okay.
motion to close.
Okay. Finally, a motion to close the meeting. Second. All in favor? Aye. Aye.
All right,
Okay.
thank you all.
Thank you, everybody.
8 or 7?